We'll call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. It is 7 o'clock. We're in the North Boardroom. It happens to be a very hot June 12th, 2017. We'll begin with a roll call, please. Ms. Van Twyver.
Mrs. Oden. Here. Dr. Murataki.
Here.
Ms. Van Twyver is here. Mr. Hallowell.
Here.
Mr. Mosier.
I'm here.
Mrs. Zeem. Here. Mrs. Hohensi.
Here.
Mr. Kaufman.
Here.
Mr. Farrington.
Here.
Dr. Brown is here. Mr. Fredrickson is here. Mr. Boucher is here. Mr. Donovan is here. Ms. Tomasetti is here. And Mr. McIntyre is here. We have a full house.
Excellent. Moving right along, if you will continue with the prayer, and then Ms. Tomasetti. Never make eye contact. Will lead us in the pledge.
Almighty God, we have the high honor and the serious duty of managing the educational institutions of our beloved city. In our common endeavors, may we find a spirit of unity and understanding which will enable us to face our multiple problems with an objective mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will be for the betterment and greater happiness of all of our fellow citizens. Amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin with the consent agenda. Does anyone have anything that needs to be removed from the consent agenda? Mr. Howell?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Mosier. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Are there any communications outside the consent agenda? Seeing none. Public question comment period pertaining to items on the agenda this evening. We have a sign-up sheet over there if anybody has anything at the beginning. We have some names. Sorry. Oh,
Tracy and asked me for her name, and she's not here yet.
okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with Ben Delarsky.
Ben Tularsky, 5 Shakespeare Road. I spoke at the Curriculum and Evaluation Committee meeting last week, but I'd like to reiterate my comments for those not at the meeting and for those here and watching in TV land. First, students have always and will always complain about their grades. No matter which system is being used, they will complain, and students have been pointing their finger at competencies and saying, I don't like competencies because I didn't get an A+ in that class. No, they didn't do work to deserve an A+. Also, some students have issues that are not relevant to the Board of Education whatsoever, such as an issue with how their grade is calculated or appears on X2. They should talk to IT, or an issue with an inconsistency among teachers would be for administration and head teachers to deal with. Most of the issues I've heard from students are not anything for the Board of Ed to be dealing with. I've spoken to A students, and they have said they need to work harder to get higher grades, or the grades they're used to getting with the new system, and I don't see anything wrong with challenging our students to do the best that they can do. There needs to be a full set of data to analyze before deciding what to do. There's only not even 2 years of data to be looking at right now. Should wait 4 years for a full class to begin and graduate the high school to decide what to do with it. This was a settled issue 2 years ago when it was originally decided upon. A similar motion failed last year, and this is just a waste of the board's time. The argument that students may not be getting into college because of the current grading system does not make sense at all when students are getting into schools such as MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. There have been complaints that if a student gets a C at the beginning of a course on an assignment, then it's almost impossible for them to finish with an A+. And that's the point. The student did not do consistent A+ work, so they likely have not proven themselves worthy of getting an A+. Members of the Board of Education consistently pride themselves by saying that they want to do what's in the best interest of students. So what's wrong with challenging students to work harder to succeed? Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Peterson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Peterson. I'm from Nashua, and I have some letters that were given to a board member anonymously to be read tonight, so I'll just start with a shorter one instead of a long one. This is from a world language teacher. I actually like the part where I can just mark something as an A, B, C, whatever, without having to go through and give everything points. Basically just using the good enough, or very good, excellent, or while they tried scales, such as B, A, C. Makes grading so much faster, and it's more applicable to the idea of competency-based grading, at least in languages that I teach, where the question is more, are they communicating and not, did they happen to miss a lot of accent marks? My bigger issues with the grades are that once an assignment or two are entered, the students' grades are pretty much set. Like I was saying with the quiz this morning, even kids who just didn't take it wouldn't find their grades affected by more than 2 or 3% on an overall scale of things. I do think that the A+ is very hard to achieve. I also think that there's a huge disparity in how teachers are interpreting grades. If a kid scores 10 on a formative assignment, one teacher might give it a B and enter it. One might not enter it since in their last class formative didn't count, but they might call it an A, and another teacher would give it an A+ because they got everything right and enter it as a summative assignment. Teachers haven't had much training, if any, in the new overall idea that competency grading really is or what it means. So our poor kids are all over the board with grades, even on the same exact assignment, and I realize that there are teachers who would challenge this, but ask the kids. We're all over the board. I think our bigger grading issues are all ×2 related. No one trusts the grades. No one believes that the numbers they see are accurate. And we see something different than what kids, parents see half the time. We can enter an A and have a grade go down, or a C- might bring an overall grade down to a B+. We don't trust it. We have no confidence in the system. Again, once there are a few assignments in there, there doesn't seem to be much change in any direction. Technically, we can still be giving 1 to 100 grades, but we're entering A- to an F on X2. That was actually a decent compromise, I thought. So this person's against the new grading system. And it's a far longer one, but I'll spare you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I leave these? Or?
Sure, if you'd like. Thank you. Kim Kleiner.
Good evening, Kim Kleiner, 32B Cortlandt Street. In all fairness, I'm here as a parent and a former board member, and I speak for only myself. It's not quite often that there's something printed in the paper that offends me to my very core. But there was this weekend. There was a letter to the editor. And I'm just going to read one sentence. Competency-based grading was passed off as a new state requirement by school administrators. It was a mandate imposed by the superintendent, not the state. For those of you sitting around the board a couple years ago, you know how false this is, and really unfair. It was never a mandate by the superintendent, and he never passed it off to that way to those of us members that sat around this table. And it offends me that someone would be disregarded this way who's no longer here to speak for himself. When I was in my second year on the board, Parents came to me out of concern, many. And as a board member, I went to the superintendent. This wasn't publicly, this was very privately, and I said I had reservations as a parent and as a board member who had heard concerns. I felt that was the right thing to do. The superintendent was very fair to my concerns. And he said at that time, let's put aside implementation. It was due to go that November or December. Let's put it aside, but will you do me a favor? Will you sit with the implementation committee made of teachers and administrators? And I said yes. Again, as a board member, I felt it was the right thing to do. I sat with that committee for a year, and when I couldn't make it, Ms. Van Twyver went in my place. And we had coffee hours with parents, we had discussions with students. I spoke to many teachers and many administrators. This wasn't something that I took when I voted yes because the superintendent told me that the state was enforcing it. It was something that I thought deserved a chance and had merits within this system. As a parent, I have a daughter in high school. Many of you have met her. And she doesn't learn by conventional methods. She has anxiety panic disorder. What competencies have helped her do is find different ways to prove to her teachers that she has mastered the material. Put a multiple choice question test in front of her? Nope, not going to work. Why? Because she starts to see different multiple choice answers and she gets confused. Her anxiety sets in. Give her a paper to write on the subject, she'll knock your socks off. There's different ways different children learn. Are there problems with the grading? Sure. There were problems with the 1 through 100 scale too. I mean, we all heard them. For 2 years, this board listened attentively. So I'm sorry for you to keep bringing up the same subject over and over is a disservice to the community. If there's problems with the grading system, please, by all means, investigate, listen to the teachers, work our way through them. But to keep rehashing stuff that has been long decided and not give it a chance is doing everyone a great disservice. On a more personal note, I want to thank members of the board, I want to thank administration, and I want to thank every teacher in this district through the last 8 years who has helped me with my daughter. When she walks across the stage Saturday, it was very much a group effort. And to the administration here at North, I really thank you. Children with this disorder tend to go the wrong way more than they go the right way. They self-medicate, they quit school, they get frustrated. And I have had a lot of support. So for anyone who's going to say any different, the Nashua school system is pretty special.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim. James Graham?
James Graham, 14 Iroquois Road. This is the 4th time I've come to ask you to stick with both competency-based grading and the grade scale that goes along with it. Each time previous to today, when I sat down to write what I had seen in the classroom to share with all of you, the words have just flowed from my mind to the screen in front of me. But today was different. I had trouble finding a new angle to present the case for this grading system. I've already shared with you multiple times that competency-based grading promotes deeper thinking from our students, deeper thinking that will lead to higher ability and a smaller learning gap as students enter college. I have shared with you how using a rubric-based grading scale provides a clearer picture into student performance and is more accurate despite having fewer potential grade choices. I've shared with you reasons for the frustration from students and parents who were adjusting to the new grade system, as well as why I thought these frustrations would eventually subside, which for the record has already started to happen. I want to thank those of you on the board who have come here with an open mind and recognize that changing back to a 100-point scale at this point is a fool's errand that will demoralize those of us who have put in the time and effort into changing this district for the better, while emboldening those who live to see meaningful change fail. I'm not here to speak to you, though. I'm here to speak to those of you that long for the comfort of mediocrity. So here's the million-dollar question I had to answer when I sat down to write what I'll share with you tonight. What do you say to someone who refuses to listen? At the end of the meeting last week, it seems like the idea of splitting up courses into competencies is settled, but the grade scale is still up for debate. So let's focus on the grade scale. The 100-point grade scale is a tally-based system. A teacher assigns point values to each part of an assessment. A student takes the assessment, and the teachers tally up how many points a student has earned. There are a few problems with this grade scale, however. The first problem is that it only requires one way to respond to any given assignment. Unorthodox responses don't fit the point template previously created by the teacher, regardless of the correctness of the unorthodox response. Points are earned for each individual aspect, which fails to take a holistic view of the response. Students who make one or two huge mistakes are often penalized less than students who consistently make tiny errors throughout multiple problems, even if all the errors are the same misconception. Depth of understanding beyond the minimum expectations has no way of being acknowledged, since points are given on a yes, you did this, or no, you didn't basis. Worst of all, the best way to get a more accurate score is to increase the number of questions, which will lead to assessments with many low depth of knowledge questions over a smaller number of high quality, high depth of knowledge questions. The 100-point scale was a great system for the industrial age, where the goal was to produce a worker who doesn't need to think hard, but can succeed at the same task over and over and over again. The problem is we're no longer training students to work in a factory anymore. We're training them to think for themselves, to analyze and to provide supporting evidence. The information age has forced us to change what we teach and how we teach it. You could think of the 100-point scale as a heavily armored tank. It was able to navigate the open space of the industrial age just fine, but it's entering the dense forest of the information age, and we're discovering that it's not nimble enough to compete. It's the wrong environment. We need a grading scale that reflects this new style of learning. A rubric-based system does exactly that. The limited number of potential scores are all clearly defined, and that's the key. It allows for each score to actually mean something. When I mark a student as proficient or partially proficient, both of us know what that means. I'm also forced to look at the entire work of the student to determine a score, which means that nothing's going to fall outside the parameters of my scoring system. The alleged precision of the 100-point scale attempts to offer, the 100-point scale attempts to offer is its downfall, because there's no way to explain the difference between an 81 or an 84 unless you're giving many low DOK questions that require a tally. Even then, there's no good way to identify where the strengths and weaknesses of that student will be, nor is there a way to determine how critical those weaknesses are. The scoring system is zoomed in too far to see the big picture. As we progress towards deeper thinking and more nuanced arguments about not just if something is right or wrong, but how and why we believe our response to be true, we must acknowledge that our grading needs to reflect this change in expectations. A rubric approach and the smaller scale that comes with it allow us to take a holistic look at student performance and respond with more effective feedback than we ever thought to do before. We're no longer mindlessly tallying points from a predetermined key that has a general scoring template, but can't account for every conceivable response. We're now forced to consider what we are seeing and sort that response into the most appropriate range. And sure, I'll concede that there are some who would prefer the 100-point scale. Nothing we do is unanimous. But there aren't many, and we already know who those people are. They shared our concern with us at school when we debated this issue years ago. We respectfully disagreed, but we continued to work together because that's what adults do. Tonight, I'm asking you to act like adults too, please understand that people are coming around to the benefits of competency-based grading and the corresponding grade scale. Many parents and students see the benefits now, and the frustrations involving the website are mostly gone. You've received progressively more positive responses towards this current policy from teachers each time this issue is brought to the board, yet this topic is retried over and over again. And why? Because we're choosing to believe the charade that there are significant numbers of teachers that want to go back to the old way but are too afraid to say something. There's a sense of desperation with this vote. Competency grading was nearly smothered in its crib last year, and now, with the momentum turning, this seems like the last good chance to go back to the status quo. Why else would a lack of support be blamed on fears of retribution from speaking out against it? Fears of retribution are teachers who have stood up and spoke out repeatedly to fight against budget cuts, who have heated discussions over curriculum with colleagues on a regular basis. Those people. The people who tell parents when their children are not living up to expectations or might not graduate on time, having no idea if the parent on the other line will attempt to go over their heads and try to get them fired. They're afraid? Fear of retribution is being sold as the elephant in the room. But the only elephant I see is stomping and trumpeting, demanding our attention to the creeping realization that these people don't exist. All you have is the promise of this imaginary army of disgruntled teachers, too scared to speak, and a survey from when competency grading was in its infancy, back when the website could not properly support the needs of the new system. A survey, by the way, that some of you choose to misinterpret. To inflate support, votes for the 11-point scale are being counted in favor of the 100-point scale, even though those are our two options at this time. How does this make any sense? This isn't a search for truth. It's a grasping of straws for anything that fits the desired narrative. We have tried to show you that this system was going to have growing pains. All meaningful change does. We've also tried to show you that the system is working and will only get better from here. We have said all we can on this issue. Are you listening yet? Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Citar.
Good evening. My name's Robert Citar. I live at 31 Bedford Street here in Nashua. I wasn't able to make the last curriculum meeting. However, I did have an opportunity to read through the minutes as they were available in plenty of time. Although I don't think that my presence at the meeting really would have changed the outcome. I found it somewhat interesting that the vote that was 2-1 to bring to the full board was by the same people who voted 2-1 to bring it out of policy to change the grading policy here at the full board. There have been more meetings here than I care to count, which have either been to modify or revert the grading system. You've already heard hours of comments from teachers, students, and community members, the vast majority of which has been in support of the grading system and in support of moving it forward, not backward. There have been a lot of things that have been said that the grading system harms the students or it's unfair to the students, all provided without evidence. When we try to provide evidence that, no, this actually works and it will work for our students, there haven't been longitudinal studies. It hasn't been around long enough. So we can discount it because there haven't been enough studies, but we can assume that it's bad in the same breath. One of the things that I wanted to address was the accuracy of the grading system. This is something that came up, I believe, last August initially and was discussed at the curriculum meeting. Mr. McIntyre did a fantastic job putting his grades out there and, I will say, showing his work. I found it very strange that the choice of a grading scale was going to impact even slightly the results of the computations. At the time, I thought there was something going on, and I let it go since it hadn't come up. Since it's come back up, I've taken another look at that. When I looked at it, and I checked, so the grades were, I'll use the first example, 2 A+ and an A-. And depending on the grading system that Mr. McIntyre had laid out, one average came back as an A, the other one came back as an A+. I tried to reproduce that using B's, B+, and B-, and that seemed to work. I also noticed that if you look at the numbers that he used for all of the grades, he used the midpoint of the range, which got me to thinking, what happens with the A+? In his analysis, he ascribed it 100 points. I had checked with Ms. Mirandos to see what was in use prior to the movement to competencies, and it turns out that if a teacher entered an A+ as a grade, it was assigned a value of 98 for computational purposes. When you plug, and I see Mr. McIntyre nodding, so he's probably done this analysis this way. When you do plug in that 98, the grades are perfectly fidelity. There's perfect fidelity between the old system and the competency-based grading system. And just to make sure that this wasn't some sort of fluke, I introduced a third grading system. Gave each grade a single point value from 1 to 9. The grades came back exactly the same way. There was no difference. The grading system, as it's applied, as the things are calculated, do not provide a disadvantage to the students. They're getting the same grades that they were getting before. The second thing that comes up is that our students are disadvantaged. They're going to have a hard time getting into college. I haven't seen how our senior class this year has been doing. They will have had competencies for 2 full years. The few that I've heard sounds like they're doing pretty well. Quick Google search finds that there are lots of colleges out there that have said and are on the record that competency-based grading, proficiency-based grading, however you want to call it, is not an impediment to getting into college. Grades are one factor of many that they consider. They get transcripts from all over the country, rural communities, urban communities, all across the world, and they have to take all of this into account. In my research, there are also other schools that take what's on the transcript and they apply their own GPA calculation. They exclude certain courses so that you can't necessarily pad your GPA with some easier general ed classes. The grades are going to be treated in the exact same way as the colleges are looking at them, and I fail to see where anyone has provided a shred of evidence that the students are being disadvantaged by this. And even in my own searches, I've not been able to find a shred of evidence that says that that is in fact the case. Final thing is that it's unfair to students. Now here I get a little bit of, I can see that, but it's not the grading system, it's the way that it's implemented. When you have teachers that will say, you've done everything that I've asked of you and you get a B, that seems like not the right way that competency-based grading is supposed to be put into play. When you set limits on recovery, how long do I have to recover? You've got a week, you've got 2 weeks, whatever it is. Limiting the grade that you can recover. You can only get a C minus, or maybe you can only get a B minus. That's the lowest grade that you can recover, regardless of how much you've learned in the time from the first assessment to the next assessment. If we were to just change the word recovery to learning, I think we'd all agree that we'd be against limiting a student's attempts at learning or limiting their grade based on what they learned in a certain period of time. Because really what we're here for education is not about grades, it's about learning. And when you get, once you get out into the real world, I think the last grade that I got was right before I walked out of college. And now I do get graded. It's called a, now I can't even think of the name of it. I get a review. I get a choice of 3 grades, which is not performing, or performing, or exceptional performance. That's it. And there are no point totals associated with that. I'd like to also talk a little bit about the survey. This was discussed by the previous speaker. This survey is over a year old. There were systems issues involved that made it very difficult to understand what was going on with the students' grades, both from the teacher's perspective, from the parent's perspective, and from the student's perspective. Those systems issues have been fixed. We are in a much better space than we were 1 year ago. I was involved in the construction of that survey, and from my point of view, and it was my sense from the point of view of everyone else on the implementation committee, this was designed to find the things that weren't working well, figure out what we could do to fix them, and move the process forward. It was not designed to determine whether to roll back to the previous grading system. This was a fix and move forward type of situation. If there was any indication that this grading system was not going to work, that should have taken place after the pilot, which was done in the 2014 2014-2015 school year, I believe, right before full implementation with, in the 2015-2016 year. Finally, I just, and this wasn't in my original notes, as I was reading through the minutes, one of the teachers had written in saying that everybody understands what a 61 is. Parents understand it, students understand it, and that they don't understand, well, he wasn't proficient in this, and he needs to work on it and needs to recover it and get better. That makes a whole lot more sense to me. There are two questions I ask my son when he brings home a 61. The first one is, what happened? The second one is, what did the rest of the class do? Was the highest grade a 65? In which case he did pretty well. Was the highest grade a 99? In which case he's got a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, when you limit a grade to just a single number, it doesn't stand on its own. You need context in order to evaluate that number. What was on the test? What was the material on the test? How was the test designed? Was it material that they hadn't seen but would be an extension? This would be sort of how you get the A+ on an assessment, is that you push, you design the assessment to push their application. So, as we're considering, yet again, whether to move this forward, I think we need to continue moving this forward. I think that the motion, on several parts, is fully addressed by the competency-based grading system that we have in place now. I don't see that going back to 100 points, and then I'll let the educators in the room speak more to that. But I think that moving forward is where we need to go, and my personal opinion is that this motion should be voted down. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam Marcoux.
Adam Marcoux, 4 Jalori Lane, President of the Nashua Teachers Union. The union stance from the get-go has been to have no stance. The union will remain neutral. Our teachers are split. At the last survey was pretty split evenly. We don't have any new data to make a different call on that. Although from what I've heard from my colleagues, more of them are leaning towards competency-based grading than they were before. But until we have new data that says differently, we will remain neutral. On the personnel recommendations, I'm a bit perplexed that there was very little notification given on some of the nominations this evening, and there was no public input on our 2 new, or presumed new, assistant superintendents. Speaking of Dr. McKinney, he's the current assistant principal at my son's school, and I'm thrilled that he's going to central office. It's a big loss for the school, but I've enjoyed working with him in both the capacity as a parent and union president. That same child is going to middle school next year, and I have worked with Mr. Atwell, and I'm thrilled that he is sticking around full-time in those schools. For a board that uses the word transparency every other phrase, there was a lack of transparency in this process at Elm Street and with the assistant superintendents. I have nothing against any of the other candidates. I don't know the person coming into accountability and assessment because there is nothing provided to the public on that candidate. And from what I've seen so far, the Elm Street people are very thrilled that their admin team's sticking together for next school year. But I do have concerns about that. And hopefully moving forward, emergency or not, the public will be better informed of who's coming to our school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Lambert. You're up, Andrew.
You wanted to make a good entrance.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Andrew Lambert, 1213 Middlesex Street, Lowell, but technically still resident of Nashua. My name is Andrew Lambert. I am an alumni of Nashua North, having graduated in 2015. I served my entire academic career in the Nashua School District, going from Dr. Crisp Elementary, Elm Street Middle School, and finishing my time at Nashua High School North. During my time in the Nashua School District, I always found myself inclined to be more involved in the school that I attended. This inclination hit its peak my sophomore, junior, and senior years at North. During those times, I became very involved in the inner workings of the district. This is what led me to be one of the most vocal students in support of the change to competency-based grading. I was one of the select few students to sit in on a vast majority of discussions about competencies, as well as have a say in how the competency system would work on a 4-point scale, and what it would mean for student success. It is also important to note that I sat on the Board of Education during the year that competencies were voted on and finalized. The system then had a soft launch the second semester of my senior year and went into full effect the year following. I served on the Board of Education with some of you who sit here today. When that vote was cast to implement the system, I was a vocal advocate for it. I stand before you today not only as a former student, former board member, or former advocate for competencies, but I sit here as a senior in college who has seen how this will impact students and who knows the value this will hold for students entering higher education, or more importantly, the lack thereof. The most important thing I have to say here today is that when I voted, or when I strongly was an advocate for competencies, I was wrong. As was every individual who fought to implement the system. When I chose to back the implementation of the system, I was naive and allowed myself to be told what to believe instead of forming my own opinion, an opinion that I have now done more than enough research to form on my own. I lived in a bubble of false knowledge and fed ideas that I believed were to be true. After leaving the district and realizing what the real world of higher education was as a student in it, I realized that this new grading system is doing no favors to the students of this district. Mind you, I'm not saying the old model was perfect. It was far from it, but this is no better. In fact, it is far worse. The model bases grading on a qualitative data that can't be used to measure quantitative knowledge in the traditional grade used in higher education. This is not how grading works in college. Once these students leave Nashua and go to college, they will not be given the opportunity to recover grades that they have failed, nor will they be allowed to make up exams because of one excuse or another. I am entering my senior year in college, and I can firmly say these students are not being accurately prepared for life after high school. They are being told that it is okay to fail so long as you have a good explanation as to why you failed or got a C or a D, and are being led down paths that only get darker the further along they go. However, it is not too late to save the students. If we accept our mistake here and now and realize that this system is failing our students and is leading to more and more students not being able to graduate on time or at all, then we may still have a chance. I've accepted that I played a large role in the failure of the Nashua School District, and more importantly, of my brother, a graduating senior, and my sister, a special needs student. They have felt the impacts of the choice that I made 2 years ago, and they have since been graded in a way that does not accurately prepare them for what comes next. I had a voice the first time around, and I voted incorrectly, and for the wrong reasons. I truly hope we don't make the same mistake again. The argument that students this year have gotten into Ivy League schools as a response to competency-based grading is very wrong, because I got into an Ivy League school as well. Granted, I chose not to go. It wasn't because of competencies. It was because of how the student works. So it's not because of competencies. Just because they will get into those schools does not mean they would do well there. Students deserve better than this. They do not deserve to be told they failed when it is the grading system that is failing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm sorry, Andrew. Paula Johnson. Did you sign up?
I said I'm used to being called Adam.
What can I speak to now? Can I speak, is it,
Anything that's on the agenda.
when does it,
And we have another opportunity at the end of the meeting for general.
Good evening, Paula Johnson. I live here in Nashua. First of all, I want to say to Mr. Marcoux, I never thought I would agree with you on anything, but things happen. You're 100% right about transparency. We need more transparency, not only on the board, but in the city in general. I wasn't going to speak on competency-based grading. I really don't know that much about it, but I did a little homework today about it, that it comes with competency-based learning and everything, and I started hitting all these links. And by the time I was done with the links, I made about 4 copies of everything. And it goes down to, eventually you go down to social promotion, which has been around forever, but it's getting worse now. But I just want to say something to Andrew Lambert. You know, don't take it personally, because the information that you were given was incorrect. And I know you and your mother very well, and I know that you're honorable people, and you voted the way you did based on the information that you were given. And the fact of the matter is that I guess the question becomes, we always implement different programs. When I was on the board, we implemented block scheduling, which I had said we need to review it within 2 to 3 years to make sure it's working. And we probably need the skinnies in there. And that was back in 2001. And to this day, I guarantee you, nobody's probably gone back and taken a look to make sure if, in fact, block scheduling and the way it's set up, because it was Pat Corbin, who was the principal of the North School at that time. Do I regret my vote? No, but I think changes should have been made with it, because I know that 45 minutes in a class was not enough. But going back to this, the competency-based grading, the question becomes, you implemented it 2 years ago maybe. When are you going to go back and make sure it's working, that it's not a failing piece of legislation or whatever you do? I mean, and that's the problem. We never go back and re-examine, is it really working, or is it just another failed program that we vote in because it looks good on paper? When my kids went to the school back in the 90s, everything was whole language, which was a failed program. The kids couldn't read. We set these kids up for not reading. When I left the board, we were now implementing phonics back into the system. So every time it looks good, it isn't always good. So I would say walk on this very carefully and make sure that you always go back and make sure it's a working piece of documents. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Gallagher? I'm sorry?
I signed a long list, so what my comments have nothing to do with your agenda this evening.
Okay. So, Jerry Bradbury? Okay.
Can I do that from here?
No, we need on the microphone. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm going to take so long.
Technology doesn't always help us.
I know, it's okay. That's fine. Thanks. Please don't. It's easier. I know.
I just didn't want it to wheel
Oh,
out from underneath.
I don't, I'm,
That's all.
as long as I know that there's only one
There we
person
go.
driving, I'm happy. Okay, my name is Jerry Bradbury. I live at 40 Ridge Road in Nashua, and I'm here in a sort of an odd position. I'm here to read a letter written by somebody I don't know about a subject that I don't know anything about, because the person wishes to remain anonymous, which I find a little strange. And when I asked more about that, it was mentioned that there was a sense of retribution for coming up with the wrong viewpoint. And I think that some of the questions, or some of the things that you read, you had a pile of stuff. You had 4 or 5 things, right? It was the same, I feel I'd need to be anonymous. I poked at that a little bit more, and found out that there was a survey of teachers done, I don't know when or how or what, but over 50% felt that attitude of, or atmosphere of intimidation. That said, I'll read the letter, but I would hope that that whole attitude of, or atmosphere of intimidation would be looked at by somebody that can do something about it, because it's a silly waste of time. I had better things to do tonight. Anyway, blind snivel. Okay, this is written by an English teacher. In English 2, a student could fail to earn credit for the course despite having a 95.35% average. Formative, 20%, inquiry, 15%, reading, 25%, writing, 25%, speaking, 15%. Those 5 things would add up to 100%. So anyway, if a student had 100% in 4 categories and a 69% in, say, inquiry, they would not earn credit for the course. Under competency-based grading, a student could fail to earn credit even if they are extremely strong in most fields and weak in just one. For example, the greatest quarterback in history, Tom Brady, would be a failure because his running game is weak. So, that's from an English teacher. Do you? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone else that didn't get an opportunity to sign up that wanted to speak? Go back to the top of the list. I have 2 people from the top of the list. Tracy Pappas. Tracy, we'll take you and Joseph. And then if we have others, Susan? Okay, yeah.
Tracy Pappas, 12 Sport Terrace. I was here at 10 to 7, and honestly, I do wish I was the first one to go. Before I start my comments, I'll say what really strikes me is when we first started discussing this, how many parents came to express concern. And I noticed they stopped coming. I noticed they stopped speaking. And when I went to call a few people to say, hey, why waste my time? The toxic atmosphere around that, surrounding that, why bother? Nobody likes to get disrespected. And I will say that my child is more than a piece of data. And we all have different strengths. Most of us can read people. And imagine if you were having a conversation with me and I sat there looking at my phone. You'd say, how rude is she? She has absolutely no interest in what I'm saying. Well, when those of us and our children, which it's very difficult for a kid to come and speak, opposing something that they know most kids agree with them but don't have the courage to say, it's a hard thing to do. And I will tell you, at the curriculum meeting, I went with my son, and I did notice when folks who agreed with the board president were there, made eye contact, shook the head. When I got up there, he stuck his head in the computer, but that didn't bother me because I'm an adult. But the same thing was done to my child. To add insult to injury, no one got up and left when anyone else spoke, but the superintendent and the assistant superintendent got up and left the room when my son spoke. He was very polite, and he didn't speak for very long. He didn't drone on and on and on. So I'm glad that parents and students who have come to speak have displayed more courtesy than has been extended to them. In my calculation, this is our third year of a pilot. Thought a pilot was supposed to be for 1 year, and then it would be evaluated after. So when this was first introduced, recovery could be done on anything. Teachers expressed concern. They felt overwhelmed. So under the guise of saying anyone can retake anything, that's how this policy got its foot in the door. Okay? Since there were so many complaints from teachers, members of this board felt badly for the teachers, so they changed it so only some things can be recovered. 4 years goes by really quickly. For those of us who have killed kids, you know it goes by in a heartbeat. Now, for those seniors now, they didn't have to do their whole full years of this grading system. So for the freshmen here, they're going to have to go for 1 year with this grading system where we had the bait and the switch. Now, it sounds like we're going to wait till Dr. Mosley makes a decision, then that's going to be a second year. So I appreciate educators wanting to try new things and reaching out and that sort of thing. But this is our one shot with a kid. And what really upsets me is when I hear, oh, how much work the teachers have put into this. And I've said this before, it takes a heck of a lot to raise a child. And I know people who are the districts where they have competency-based grading. Everything gets to be recovered. So what's going to happen is when our kids, who are freshmen now, go to apply for school, geez, it looks like these kids from Nashua are kind of lazy because they're not making the kind of recovery that other people do. You're really putting the kids in a terrible situation by going with this for another year under the current conditions you have. And I'm sorry that for whatever reason, our IT department can't figure it out. There are outside contractors. Anyone who's ever dealt with a budget, there's always money. People can find money when they want to find money. Get an outside contractor that can come in and figure it out. That is my suggestion. Again, if you put this off for another year, keep with the bait and switch. It's these freshmen that are really going to have a hard time, and it's really not fair. They're going to have a harder time getting into school, and the kids at the lowest the kids at the lowest level, it doesn't help them either. And I would like to say that the lack of respect which has gone on for people who question it, I have no wonder that teachers sent nice people from the community out to read for them. And my understanding is there may be some more letters. You know, and I am not surprised at all, and they're not being paranoid, and these people do exist. And one of the teachers referred to this as being a crib. Guess what? Those of us who are freshmen, they started at the crib. They're not in the crib anymore, and we need to send them off on their own. And the way this is working out now, it puts them at a terrible, terrible disadvantage. And I think with the tone of such offense when someone writes a commentary, if you're that offended, then you shouldn't be reading the commentary. That was my information from the school board. Competency instruction is required. Competency-based grading is not required. However it happened, and those of us who have ninth graders are stuck holding the bag. And, you know, for once, I understand that there's a lot going on. I understand people are busy. And the problem is, no matter what time it is in the school year, oh, it's a very busy time, we can't do it now. Oh, we can't do it now, we can't do it now. There's never a time to do it, and there's never a time to evaluate. And that's the reason why we're in the position we're in. And I really hope, once and for all, that it's the kids that are, it's these kids that are going to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph Pappas.
Hello, Joseph Pappas, 12 Short Terrace. I just wanted to start by saying that one of the biggest things that the competency system lacks is consistency. It lacks consistency across the board. First of all, being in recovery. When it started, you could recover everything, anything to 100. Nowadays, well, you can recover some things to a C- and others to an A-. Well, you actually can't recover this one. No, it's just very inconsistent. There's no point in it. Like, be consistent. Another thing is grading. With the 4-3-2-1 scale, it's supposedly, oh, it's pointing out what the students are doing wrong. Oh, yeah. No. In the 100-point system, you have clear-cut deductions. This is what you did wrong. I don't know what people are talking about, how it's so clear under this 4-3-2-1 system. Half the time when I get something back, I have no clue the heck what I did wrong. It's just not made clear, so what's the point? Another thing is that when you start a course, you're given a program with the grading, the recovery, all that jazz. That's not always stuck to, and I find more times than not it's not stuck to throughout the entire course. So if they're going to have that, they should stick to it. It should be much more consistent. Another thing is that the system is so confusing. Again, the deductions that they take, the supposed reason for it is so that, oh, we're making our students really apply themselves more. Oh, we're showing off what they're doing wrong. I've never noticed that. The only thing that it does is it puts you into a category. Oh, well, you did pretty well. You kind of did what I wanted, but you could have done a little bit more. What could I have done more? Well, no, it's very vague. It's not clear-cut like it would be under the 100-point system. Another thing is that, oh, people are saying how it's improving, how students are doing. Oh, yeah. I came to a few of the meetings, and the first one that I came to, they showed this presentation on how the amount of A's have gone down. How is that improving people's performance? Oh, well, it's not about the grades. It's not about the grades, what they learn. Well, what else are colleges going to see how you learn other than your grades? Overall, I would just say that the system definitely lacks consistency, clearness, and I personally have heard more people than not certainly dislike the system. They're just too afraid to say something about it. So, yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you. As I said, if we have somebody else that didn't get to sign up would like to speak, all we ask is you give your name and we need to know where you live. Okay, and Susan? Okay. Oh.
Good evening, Lou Juris here from Haines Street in Nashua. I understand this program is young. The competency system is still in its infancy. When I want an electrician to come to my house, I want the guy who maybe got a B or a B+. If I have a doctor, I want the doctor who understands medical science and maybe didn't get an A in physiology because he was friends with the teacher, or they really thought he worked hard enough, but that A was a true A, not maybe a B or a B-. It's still early. I think this program needs time to work itself through, and we need more data, and we need more effort. I understand maybe some people are anxious, people are afraid to speak up. There seems to be a lot of conspiracy theory attitude that no one wants to come and talk about it, no one wants to, people are intimidated. I'm not buying it. I'm not. I've been to some of the meetings with the principal. I'm sure some of the schools, some of the colleges who understand competency know that the students who are coming in with B averages are probably B averages. They're not C minus. You know, maybe it didn't matter how friendly they were with the teacher or the administration or whatever. I understand they're going to do their work, they can do their homework, but you have competencies, you're able to recover some things. That means you're going over the material, you're going over the subject matter, and you're becoming more proficient at it. When I got out of here in 1983, we were still in the South building, we're still in the, which is now, South, it was the main school. If my memory serves me, I graduated in the upper quarter, and if I had this system in place, reality, I'm not sure if I would have made the upper quarter. I mean, if the rigor is there, and you have to go through it to understand it, you have to go over it, it does give you, I believe, it will give you a bigger advantage once you move on from this, whether you go to the vocational school, whether you go to a job training, whether you go to a higher, whether you go to an Ivy League type situation, or regardless of what you do. This does give you the background, this does give you the tutelage, this does prepare you, in my opinion. And again, it's, we're a year into this. If we were 7, 8 years into this, maybe we could have this discussion in a bit more detail. Maybe Paula, not that I always agree with Paula, but she makes a point that, maybe it's good to review some of these things as we go down the line. But I would, with my daughter here as a freshman, and you can see the effort that she's putting in. It seems a little different from where she came from in junior high, and I would give this the opportunity to carry on and to keep moving forward with it. And I'm glad you're having this discussion right now, but the idea of, trying to do a switch or try to make a big change at this point might be premature. So thank you. Good evening to you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Susan Rourke, 8 Chelsea Court in Nashua. I've spoken in this position before a number of times to each of you, and I also sent you a multi-paragraph email just this afternoon, and I'm not going to read that to you because I expect that you've already read it, but I was speaking in support of competency-based grading. Instead, what I'd like to talk just briefly about today is not to promote competency-based grading, but rather to speak against the 100-point scale. I came to education in an unusual way, through a back door. Education was not my first career. My first career was in book publishing. When you buy a book and you look at the back cover to see if you want to read it or not, I used to write that. That was my job. And when my division of a company was sent over to Glenview, Illinois, I was offered a wonderful job, and I said, no, my life is here in Nashua, and so I was looking for a new career. Coincidentally, somebody at the high school had just resigned, walked out, and somebody needed an English teacher pronto. And they knew of me, and they knew that I had a degree, and so I became an English teacher. The reason that I tell you this anecdote is that I had zero educational course background. All of my education, prior to my courses that I needed to take to become certified, all of my education was in my content area. But even as somebody who had never taken an education course, when I began to teach, I recognized very quickly that a 100-point scale was rigged against students because they had 40 points to show what they could do and 60 points to fail. And it's probably a pretty well-kept, I never kept it a secret, but a little-known fact that from virtually the first day that I started teaching and assessing and grading, my grades were always based on a 50-point scale. 10 points for an A, 10 points for a B, 10 points for a C, 10 points for a D, and then the F. And quite honestly, Mr. Farrington, I had your daughter in class. Mr. Murataki, I had your daughter in class. Mrs. Hohensee, I had 4 of your children in class. And they were graded fairly, and they all were successful in life and got into good colleges and are leading very successful lives right now. What I did 27 years ago, which is how long I've been teaching, was a modified form of standards-based grading, competency-based grading, where I did not use a 100-point scale. And it worked for me then, it worked for my students. They understood that what I did was fair, and that when I assessed them, that I was assessing them based on what they could show me they could do, not taking points away for what they could not do. So when we started making our move toward competency-based grading, I said, you know what? That sounds like what I have been doing and what I want to continue to do. We are evolving. We still need to make tweaks and changes. That is absolutely true. But I will forever prefer the grading scale that we use now to a 100-point scale, because I think the 100-point scale is unfair to students. And I'd just like to, promise you that as an educator, that kids are our top priority. We do not make decisions based on what is easiest for us, what is most comfortable for us, what might look good on paper. We make decisions because we want to be fair to the students, because we love our content areas, because we feel fidelity to the curriculum, and because we want what is right for our students. And I believe that competency-based grading is right for our students. And the very last thing that I'd like to say is that I serve an interesting role at Nashua High School South, in that my role as a head teacher is really a liaison between the faculty and administration, and I spend lots of time with both of those groups of people. My department of 20 trusts me. They come to me with everything, and I can promise you that they never come to me fearful of retribution. I've heard that. I've heard it at these meetings. I have never heard it from a single one of my colleagues, and I just need to make that clear, because if it's happening, I am completely unaware of it, and I think I would hear it from people that I work with. So I wanted to clear that up as well. Please think about what you're doing as you talk about the 100-point scale. It's not fair to kids when they have a greater chance of failing than they do of passing. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call. Yes, ma'am. Just your name and address, please.
Jacqueline Lesser, 4 Berwick Street, here in Nashua. All right, I'm coming at this from the math teacher perspective. I've been working on competencies for almost 10 years now, and I feel very strongly that they are the right thing to be doing for our students. I'm working with these students who are struggling to get their high school diplomas, and these students need those extra opportunities. My students can recover everything, whole semester, back to our cutoff days tomorrow. And these are not issues within my classes. But I'm wondering, over and over as I listen to everybody, is this really about a grade scale, or is this about class rank? I need to be able to differentiate my child from so-and-so's child, because my kid's 2 points higher and is going to be number 1 in the class, not number 2 in the class. Is that what we're really dealing with here? And if it is, the solution is get rid of class rank. We've been saying this for a while at our level, that class rank does not make sense with a competency-based grading system at all. I mean, totally inappropriate things to have together. It's like putting together, I don't know, sardines and peanut butter. It just doesn't go. It makes me wonder when people keep coming back to that 100-point scale, that 100-point scale. We're looking to rank our kids. Our class rank already makes absolutely no sense prior to our change to competency-based grading. Teachers have always been grading at whole numbers, 98, 97, 98, 99, whatever they're giving the student. And we're going out 4 decimal places to define 1 and 2. If you know anything about science and significant digits, you know that's absolutely ludicrous. It's time to let go of it. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the college model either, which is where we want all our students to go. In college, they don't rank you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're dealing with universities of 10,000 students. It's meaningless. They rank kids by, have you graduated with honors, with high honors, with exceptional honors? Can we use a similar system? Somebody suggested to me at one point that at her husband's school, they had what was called a valedictorian diploma. If you had A's in the appropriate level courses that you were in for all 4 years, every quarter, every semester, you got a valedictorian diploma. They didn't try and define who was 1, who was 2. 12 semesters of A's? We really don't need to define which one's better than the other. It doesn't matter. They're all going to Ivy Leagues if they want to. They also had a salutatorian diploma. If you were on honor roll all the way through for all of your semesters, you got a salutatorian diploma. It indicated that you were doing a high level of work all the time. The nice thing about that type of program versus ranking kids against each other, because there is only number one, is that you lose that impetus to take the APs just because it jacks your class rank up. And that is what's happening. Kids aren't taking the classes that they love necessarily. They're taking the ones that will get them the highest class rank, the highest GPA. And because our AP classes are ranked so heavily in terms of weight in their GPAs, they might love creative writing, but because it's not an AP class, instead they're taking AP English that maybe they do or don't love and maybe they're not that enthusiastic about. And I think that's sad. They're not taking CTE classes because that will really mess up your class rank. And that's equally sad. Whether they're going to do the trade as a hobby or as a career, every student should be wanting to explore those wonderful opportunities that our district offers. It is amazing all the wonderful things our district offers. And to have children making decisions to not take classes because it's going to destroy their GPA seems really kind of wrong, to be perfectly honest. So I'll leave it there. I am against a 100-point scale. I love competency grading. I, too, hear very few teachers, coworkers, and I'm not a head teacher, so I'm not that person that they'd have to worry about retribution from. I'm a coworker. I'm not hearing it either. I think perhaps we need to look at class rank to get this to get the complaining to go away. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. 15-minute time limit. We'll have to work on that, I guess. Superintendent comments. Dr. Brown.
Thank you very much, President Farrington. In the interest of the hour, I'll try to keep these brief. So I have just a few short items. I let the board know about a week ago that we were the recipient of a dropout prevention grant, quite a lucrative one. It is $300,000 over the next 2 years, $150,000 each year. And I wanted to give you a sense of what some of the things are the grant is going to pay for. It will continue to pay for summer school credit recovery, a social worker that travels between North and South High School, the continued home education visits through adult education. These are for kids who are close to graduating but might have dropped out, and we work with them to find alternative pathways. So those are some of the things that we have had funded and are very pleased to announce again that we have had a dropout prevention grant at $300,000. Just a quick reminder that this is graduation season. I think everybody knows that. Adult education graduation is June 15th, 6 o'clock here at Nashua High North, and Mr. Kaufman is going to deliver some of the remarks. I'll be there as well. Thursday. Yeah, Thursday the 15th. Nashua High South is going to graduate on Saturday at 9 at SNU. That's in Manchester. Nashua High North, same day, 1 o'clock, SNU. And then the last thing I'd like to do is to recognize two individuals who have been of extraordinary importance to me during my tenure here in Nashua. Mr. Mike Fredrickson and Mr. Roland Boucher have stepped up and agreed to step into an interim role as the principal and assistant principal or co-principal, whatever you'd like to call them, at Ledge Elementary School. And they did that while concomitantly delivering their duties and meeting their responsibilities as the assistant superintendents. And setting that aside and the work associated with being back in an elementary school, which I think they've enjoyed, gentlemen, when I asked them if they might like to step in for a brief period of time, there was a quick tussle to see who would be able to do it. It was sort of a me first. They both wanted to get back into a building. But now that I'm wrapping up my time here in Nashua, as are the two of them, I've had the great pleasure of working with a lot of individuals who are just outstanding educators in my 20-odd years as a superintendent. And these two folks are among the finest. They are common sense, well-read. They have a great sense of what to do the right thing and how to do the right thing for kids. And they're a great advocate for teachers. And it has been my great pleasure to work as part of that team. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure of mine. Thank you for stepping in at Ledge, and thank you for the opportunity to work with you here during the 2017-18 year, 16-17 year. So thank you very much. That's it for me.
Okay. Board response to superintendent's comments. Looking over here, we'll start over here with Mrs. Hohensee. Do you have anything?
Not at this time.
Mr. Mosier.
Yes, I'd like to echo her comments about the assistant superintendents stepping up. It shows that their dedication and their maturity and the fact that they enjoy what they're doing. I congratulate them. Thank you.
Mrs. Oden?
Yes, I just want to thank both of them. Wow, what a way to finish up. I know you both are enjoying your time at the elementary level. The kids know it, and it's obvious when you go in there that you're enjoying all of your time there. So thank you for all you've done over the year and for the recent reassignment. Thank you. Good luck.
Mrs. Zine?
Ditto. I don't want to beat a dead horse to death, but I have to say that Mr. Fredrickson and Mr. Boucher have some of the best people skills that's ever been my pleasure to come across. And wherever you go, whatever you do, I wish you the very best of everything. Thank you.
Over here, Mr. Hallwell.
I'll relay my thanks to the assistant superintendents in private.
Okay. Dr. Martaki?
What can I say that hasn't already been said? Thanks, guys.
Ms. Antwiver?
Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Fredrickson for another thing, and that is his participation on the policy committee. I have enjoyed working with you, and I've enjoyed, Mr. Boucher, your sense of humor. And I want to thank our superintendent for all that she has done for us this year. And I've enjoyed working with you too, and I wish you well.
I got to say, I was a little concerned the other day when I drove by Ledge and I saw all the kids spread across I don't know how many fields out there. And I actually saw Mr. Boucher, but I think the same would apply to Mr. Fredrickson, that I don't know where my confidence would lie if you had to run those kids down to get them back in the building. Did you get them all back? Yes? Good. You guys have been great to work with. You really have. I've enjoyed it immensely, and we're going to miss you. Thank you. Students, Ms. Tomasetti, anything? Mr. McIntyre? Sure.
So during last week at the curriculum and evaluation
committee meeting, once we found out about this proposal, I brought it to Student Voice, and we had a pretty heated discussion about it, about the grading system. A lot of the similar points was, what's the point of changing it back now? As students, I think we're all used to the grading system. We definitely know teachers' expectations a lot better than we used to. Basically, we're used to it now. We want some consistency with regards to what's on our college transcript. The problem came up with, as a junior, this year will be my second year with a different grading system. My freshman year, we had the 100-point scale. Sophomore year, we had the 4-point scale. And this year, we have the same scale. So explaining to colleges all these changes, and if we would potentially go back to the old grading scale next year, that's going to be more different grading scales on our transcript. And what's really the validity in ensuring that all students had the same level of consistency with what grading scales that they've been assessed on. Then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that the Student Voice came up with the idea that the new grading system really assesses you and gives you a broader picture of your understanding. So for example, in a Spanish class, if you're writing a letter to someone, and you forget those few accent marks, but you totally nail the letter and you're proficient with distinction, obviously. In the old grading system, you would probably got 10 points off for missing those accent marks. And is that really where you're at? So I really like the idea of rewarding students for what they have and not what they don't have, and not deducting points for something that they didn't get or something like that, when they can show it in other ways that they really did ace it. So that's all I want to say.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having the courage to go and do that. Committee on Budget. Mr. Hallwell, you got anything new this evening?
Nope, I'm just waiting for it all to come back in our lap.
So to speak. Committee on Finance and Operations, Mr. Hallwell.
We have a meeting tomorrow night. We'll be reviewing the Elm Street and Mount Pleasant architect review of those two schools. Not dollar amounts yet, but just what needs to be improved. And the other thing that will be on there that I'm scanning down here is the always fascinating FY17 year-end forecast, which will be updated, and I note here, hand-carried by Mr. Donovan to our meeting. So he doesn't like to give us those in advance, so we have to wait till tomorrow.
And he's refining his 600 and what was it? $612 estimate at the end of the year?
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to the meeting.
We're still working on it right now, actually.
But the fact that you're here this evening...
He doesn't even tip his hand, like which
No,
way
no.
it's going to go.
But I think the fact that he's here this evening, and I find that encouragement there. Committee on Policy, Ms. Van Twyver.
The Policy Committee has not met since the last time the board has met, and the next meeting will be June 20th. And I want to thank Jeffrey Leone, who is the CTE HTTV guru, for producing Policy Matters, which appears on ETV every night, I believe, about 6:30. And I want to thank our two student members of the board for their hosting of the program, and they've done an excellent job, and look forward to seeing them back in the fall after they have a nice rest.
Well said. Committee on Curriculum and Evaluation, my understanding is Mr. Kaufman is going to present this.
But I'd like to just make a quick
go ahead.
comment first.
Sure.
First, the next meeting of the Curriculum and Evaluation Committee is going to be on Monday, June the 19th. It'll be from 5:30 to 7:30. And I would also like to give my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Kaufman for having done the yeoman work of chairing curriculum evaluation, not just once, but twice, including last meeting. So, Mr. Kaufman, take it away.
Thank you. Dr. Moritaki explained that in our conversation, we were kind of playing with it. It was a trial by fire. And as you're all sitting here, you know the embers are still burning. and the fire is not quite out. The Committee on Curriculum and Evaluation brought forth a recommendation to restore the traditional grading system. At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Ms. Hohensee, as I believe she has a presentation to make.
Do we have a motion here?
We want to get the motion for the discussion.
Please.
Yeah. Move to restore the traditional grading system in our 2 high schools, which respects and preserves the contractual right and responsibility of teachers to grade pupils. I'm putting an S there. Restores the 100-point back-end arithmetic calculator.
I think it should be maintains.
Yeah. The traditional A through F grades on student report cards, requires a grade of 70 or higher to pass a course, and may include a recovery process of incomplete or non-proficient work at the discretion of the teacher. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hohensee. And now, Mrs. Hohensee, you have something?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, if Mr. Kaufman would help me plug it in.
Oh.
When we need the screen.
Could you give me an idea of what we're looking at a time?
We're just looking at a PowerPoint because it's visual and it's easier to explain.
Time frame?
It should be not that long. I was just going to start with a little bit of background. The superintendent had told this board that competency-based grading was mandatory, and the implementation began. There were disagreements over how to do it, but there was no vote taken that I could see. I did a search on the website on all the motions that were made for the past couple of years, back to 2013 or earlier, and the motions I saw were January of 2014. There was a move to delay the pilot-based grading system until there could be a controlled pilot with it clearly defined. That motion failed. There was another motion to transition to support the grading system, but no teacher will be required to use the competency grading until the implementation plan was approved by the board. That was tabled. So there weren't any initial motions until I saw August of 2015, when a policy, ILBAA-R, was adopted. It was just a day or so before class started, because it was August 31st in 2015. And in that policy, it said students will have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their understanding of each required course competency. So there was no restriction on remediation, and there was concern by board members that there would be too much remediation. But it was voted in. Then on May 31st, there was a motion that I made to keep the course competencies and revert to the 100-point system and use report cards from A to F. Okay. Close it. Okay. The 100-point system is only the internal.
Get it to the next slide.
Okay.
Just down there.
Okay, so we'll go back. This was the first slide, and the 2 motions that failed. So the board, as far as I could find, made no motion that succeeded to put this into play. Continuing with the background, we had the first one that put in a policy, ILBAA-R, that allowed for multiple remediation. Then when I got on the board, somewhere around that time, I remember someone on the board had asked for a legal opinion on whether or not competencies were required. We got the legal, or the board got the legal opinion back, and it wasn't required. I was not yet sworn in. So in May of 2016, I put on a motion to keep the competencies, revert to the 100-point conversion calculations. This is just an internal mechanism to give accurate computations. The more points of precision, the more accurate your response is. Every time you round down to a 4-point system, you lose accuracy. So this gave full accuracy, whatever the teacher gave in. If the teacher gave in a letter, it would be converted, but you wouldn't have a loss of accuracy. The next thing that happened when this motion failed was on August 8th, 2016, we approved a grading system for the one calendar year, 16-17. And currently, we've got remediation that's inequitable and kind of violates our policy. Nothing's being done about it. This is the survey that we had. Which grading system do you prefer? This is the only survey that was asked this question. It was asked of teachers, parents, and students. 100% of these parents live in Nashua, and the board represents these parents. And it was pretty clear that the overwhelming majority preferred the old grading system. Another question on that same survey was which grading scale would provide the best measure of my students' performance against course competencies. Again, the traditional 100-point scale was the clear favorite, and this again was only the internal computation they saw online, but it wasn't in the report card. Types of data. This is interesting because there's a difference between qualitative data, like an observation, a conversation, it's subjective, varying interpretations, and a quantitative data, which is number-driven, valid, reliable, defensive, uniform. And again, for qualitative explanations or quantitative grades. One is more descriptive, the other is more scientific, whether or not you find that there's accuracy, but it's numerically based, and it's usually less margin of error. So what we're saying is the quantitative should determine the qualitative, not the other way around. You can't just say, I kind of think the student is here, and then pick a number out of a hat. There's more accuracy when you give an assessment and you have a quantity, and then you can go to a qualitative description. These are a couple of concerns that we have. We have the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. On their website, they recommend the grading reporting practices are regularly reviewed and revised. So that's just good practice. Our high school is about to undergo a process of accreditation. So what message are we sending them with no review of our grading standards, our grading system? There's a secondary issue of equal opportunities, civil liberties issue. Remediation is not equitable for the so-called grade grubbers. And every time I say that word, I really cringe because we have the hardest working kids with a great work ethic and we're denigrating them. I just find it offensive. Is the grading equitable across gender and race? Have we broken that out? I mean, we want to make sure that we have equal opportunities under this grading system. This is a new framework for grading. It's just a reference that I pulled out to show different terminologies that you use when you're talking about looking and reviewing your grading system. Is it reliable across different graders or teachers? Is it consistent in its feedback to students? Is there differentiation for levels of achievement to avoid grade compression? This one's important, so remember that. I saw it before I realized this is a valid criteria by which to judge our grading system. You want a stable system to promote validity and discourage grade inflation. You want transparency or clarity. You want to acknowledge subjectivity rather than mask it. There is subjectivity in most grading. And it has to be practical, not too unwieldy, etc. This is the grade distribution from 2012 to 2017. The first 3 years, we had the traditional grading. The next 2 years, we had the competency-based grading. This current year, we only have a half year's data. That's why there's an asterisk on it. So pretty much you see that our Bs have gone up considerably. Our Fs have gone up considerably. Nearly 10 percentage points for the B. This is another chart. It's better in your booklet. It's rounded. I don't know why Mr. Kaufman's computer doesn't like rounded lines. But anyway, the data is pretty much the same. You have Bs and Fs are spiking. So it's competent and non-competent grades. You're losing the bell curve. Again, if it was rounded, you'd see that the 3 lines in the middle, that they were a rounded curve, whereas these spikes are totally different. So grade compression, you have loss of the differentiation between student achievement levels. It's not a good sign for a grading system. We're losing our A's, we're losing our C's, they're all migrating towards a B. The D's have disappeared, but there's a lot more F's. We pretty much have a binary system. Not totally, but it's leaning towards, and I apologize for the graph. Another one without curves. Curves are so much prettier. In your booklet, they are curved. This is a 2011 grade inflation study. It starts with the green from 1960. This was private and public colleges and universities, 200 of them. And it shows, like the green, you pretty much have a bell curve. And over the years, you went to the purple, public and private, and then the red in 2007, public and private. So you're seeing for the A's, there's been a 30 percentage point increase. That's your grade inflation. The C's went down. The B's pretty much stayed closer together than ours, and same with the D's. They're relatively constant compared to the A's and the C's, which spread out. Let's see, where am I? So that's different. We're not really conquering inflation with our system. We're doing something quite different, and that was a revelation to me when I saw this study. Okay, these are just a summary of problems that I see with the grading system. It's inequitable, in violation of district policy, where you remediate only the C- or below grades, not for the so-called grade grubbers with higher grades. You've got grade compression, which damages prospects for high achievers. They may succeed, but they might have succeeded a little bit better. It's hard to tell when you compress grades. And those grades do matter at top colleges. They might pull off a miracle, and some it may not matter. But, you know, it is a factor. It undermines the motivation. The fewer A's you get, less incentive or reward for hard work. If you're a lower performing student, you might say there's less urgency when you can always remediate. It's not as transparent and easily understood by the community. A 5-page report card is a little too long, and it is opposed by the majority of our teachers, parents, and students in our community. The retribution is real. I've met several teachers and communicated with them. They don't feel they can speak openly. I know that students have been bullied by teachers after speaking publicly about the grading, told that you won't get any, there'll be no grade grubbing in my class when you get here. I mean, it's gratuitous insults. We don't need that. And we had climate problems. They were not addressed. Why not? I mean, does the administration benefit from leaving the climate in the way it is? It's not acceptable. This is the original motion minus a piece, but it's on your, it's in your packet. I will try to read it for those who don't have it. Move to restore the traditional grading system in our 2 high schools, which, and then it's got these bullet points, respects and preserves the contractual right and responsibilities of teachers to grade pupils. This comes from 8.6 in our union contract that allows teachers to be the final arbiter of grades. It restores the 100-point back-end arithmetic calculator. It's internal to the machine. Maintains the report card, maintains the 70 or higher to pass a course, and it switches recovery to an incomplete or non-proficient work at the discretion of the teacher. I was going to propose that we, after listening and over the past week to all of the different comments, to merge the qualitative rubrics of competency instruction with the quantitative measurements of an old grading system, a compromise. So if it's a pleasure of this board to move to reframe the high school grading system to keep competency instruction, not the grading, because there's a list of problems, as you can see in blue, inequitability, compression of grades, validity concerns, respects the rights, contractual right and responsibility of teachers to grade pupils, uses a 100-point back-end arithmetic calculator, better precision. We currently have a 4-point grade calculator. Again, this is internal. It's just the computer averaging our grades. A teacher puts in a grade, they have a variety of grades they can put in. They have to be numerically converted. You can't average letter grades, so there has to be a conversion process. We're just saying instead of the 4-point, use the 100-point. It's internal. It's not what the teachers have to do in the classroom. It's just to tally and average the grades. And then you maintain the traditional report card, so we're not changing that. Require the 70 or higher, which was a change when competency grading came in, but to keep consistency. And I think Bob Sherman, our former board union president, was very helpful to me in telling me on how I had to be precise on all these different aspects to have clarity in the system. And this last, including recovery through an incomplete grade at the discretion of the teacher, that would address the inequity in the course remediation, but still allow, because we're keeping the competency, we're still allowing that whole mechanism to recover it if the teacher thinks that there's a possibility that the student is still learning and will still proceed and become more competent. It doesn't undermine the rubrics or the work that people have done for 6 or 7 years. It just changes the quantitative grading system. This is a mixed method approach. It keeps the competency developments in rubrics, prevents grade compression, grades have more validity, restores flexibility to teachers, better understood and supported by the community, equitable to all students, and respects the grading decisions made by teachers as guaranteed under the union contract. And that's all I've got.
Ms. Hohensee, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
So are you suggesting that the original motion be withdrawn and in its place substituted this text, or you're amending the original with this text? I'm a little confused.
I would propose that we amend it. It's softer. It doesn't seem as threatening. We're keeping a lot of the old, so we're reframing the grading system. A lot of the things that are in here were changes that were made with a competency-based grading. So it resolves some of the problems and keeps some of the benefits of the change. I think it would benefit everybody, and it addresses the problems of inequity and compression. And yes.
Okay, so that's a motion to amend?
Motion to amend to that language, which
I'll second.
Can we put this up,
Wait a
please?
minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Is it, I still am doing the committee report?
What's that?
I'm still doing,
We got a
There's a
motion.
motion on the floor
oh,
and an
okay.
amendment.
To the amendment. So is there any discussion?
Thought I'd wait till the
Can
screen
you wait a minute?
I'm
till I
sorry.
write that?
Okay, relax. I'm just trying to keep it moving.
Okay, all right.
I don't know how to undo it, so I'm not going to.
It's a good thing that you can catch in the back of your sweater.
Me?
I said it's a good thing.
No better than that.
We got to keep our sense of
Yes.
humor here.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, so, it's right here.
What page is that?
Next to the last. Okay, so we have a motion to amend the original motion, and everybody has a copy of it. For the audience, you just got to see it, so. Any discussion on the amendment?
May I?
Sure.
I want to thank Mrs. Hohensee for taking the time to give us a brief history and overview. I know that this is an issue that concerns her greatly, and I know that fairness is what's driving the concern. To that extent, I will support your amendment. However, I must say I'm a bit confused in what the complete language is, because it's such a large motion, a long motion, that is it and I don't understand what's being replaced, or you're just adding this text to the entire previous motion.
It would,
Essentially a whole new motion.
it's modeled on the same one. It's a whole new motion. The the blue text is just explanation. So it's just the black text. Move to reframe the high school grading system to, and it's got 6 bullet points.
So, may I?
Sure.
So would you want to withdraw the original motion and then just replace it with this? That would probably, I
Well,
think
we've
that
got
would
the
be
amendment out here. We might just well work on it. So anybody else have anything else? I'm not sure what.
On the amendment.
Did you have something?
On the amendment.
On the amendment, that's right. Mrs. Oden, did you have something?
I had some correspondence from teachers, and some of them I have a great deal of respect for them, but one of the teachers wrote something, and I don't know if now's the time to read what the teacher wrote to me, because it seems similar to what this is saying, and the person is in favor of competencies. And let me just read one part, and you can determine for yourself. For one thing, X2 is still a problem for what this teacher said. Let me find the paragraph. Oh, why don't you continue until I can find the paragraph that addressed this? Thank you.
Dr. Murtaki.
Yes, thank you. The question is for Ms. Hohensee. On the page with the amendment, there are some words that are in blue versus the wording that is in black. The wording that is in blue is usually within parentheses and appears to be explanatory, but not part of the real motion. So basically, what we are going to be voting on, should we vote to approve the amendment, is the wording in black but not in blue. Is that correct?
Yes, under the word amendment, everything in black below it,
On that page?
on that one page.
Okay, all right, so that clarifies things for me.
Okay.
If I may
Sure.
follow up. This amendment actually goes in line with my position on this topic for several years. I've always supported the idea of competencies, but I've always felt that the replacement of the grading system away from the 100-point scale was unnecessary. So I will be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Mrs. Hohensee, just for my own benefit, it looks like there may be some slight variations, but it looks like essentially the only difference between the original motion and the amendment is that you added keep competency instruction, not competency grading.
Yes, I tried to make it clear, but I didn't want it to be offensive. The other one's move to restore the traditional grading, like we're going back and dissolving everything. But that's not the case, because things have changed. We're now 70 or higher to pass a course. There's a lot of changes that we're keeping. So I softened it, I tried to make it more of a compromise, and that's what I got.
But back to my question. The amendment is everything that was in the original motion, plus keep competency instruction, not competency grading.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Hallwell.
So reading the amended sentence, how do you match that against the next sentence, which is to respect and preserve the contractual right and responsibility of teachers to grade pupils? We're not going to have competency grading. Does that mean that teachers cannot use competency grading? We've heard teachers refer to the fact they've been doing it for 12 years now without students being disadvantaged. So is that the intent of the motion, of the amendment?
If I may?
Sure.
The intent of this line is just to recognize in the union contract 8:6 talks about the right and responsibility of the teacher, not the principal, not the superintendent, to keep and maintain records on each pupil and to provide a grade. That's just a reflection back to that. It's sort of like a hat tip to our teachers as being the primary graders of our students. It doesn't really do anything. It's just a hat tip to the union contract.
Sure.
Follow up. Well, a couple problems I have with this. One, I don't like putting language in motions that has no intent. Tends to get you in trouble. Number two, I really don't like putting language that's part of the contract inside a policy. That doesn't seem to make sense. And I still don't understand I don't know what the intent of that line. You're saying it basically has no intent other than to let teachers know that that's in their contract, I guess. But if you're putting it in here because you're saying we need, this represents what the teachers want, I don't think that we could get all the teachers to agree that this is what they want. Clearly, there's a bunch here that don't agree with that. So I guess I'm confused by those two lines. I'm confused as to why that line is even in there. I can understand it as a rationale for why you're making the motion. I don't particularly agree with it. I mean, we heard tonight both that we should let teachers grade however they want because they have that ultimate responsibility. But then also that the problem with the new scale is that there's too much variability in how it's being applied. Well, I got news for you. It's not like the old one was applied steadfastly either. And we all went to school. Every teacher is different. Some teachers are harder, some teachers are easier. Depending on what subject it is, that can be different for different students. And I'm all in favor of that. I'm in favor of there being differences between teachers. And it's something you have to work through, but overall, it works out. So I'm not in favor of, well, any of this language, but certainly the first two lines to me, I'm not even sure what their result might be or how they might be interpreted.
Let me respond.
Mrs.
to
Hohensee.
that. We also have something in the contract that says how many students we should have in a class, which are lower or smaller than what the state requires, and we pay teachers a stipend in addition to their normal salary if their classroom is overfilled. So the contract decides a lot of our policies. This is just recognizing it because I think some people have lost sight of it, and it's just bringing it back in. It's not that teachers say that they all want it, but it's in their contract, so they're certainly not opposed to it. If they wanted to, they could jettison it. We're in impasse now. They could take that language out, but I don't think they will. So it's just a recognition of what is.
I'm going to respond to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't understand the relevance at all of the number of students per class. The reason it drives our policy because it's in our contract, and so therefore we had to have a policy that would make sure that we don't do that and cost the district a lot of money. So I'm not even sure actually it is in a policy. I think it is in the contract, and therefore we do it. So it's not, they're not the same.
Mr. Mosier.
Thank you. You know, Bob is correct when he says about the things that are being in the contract and not necessarily needed a policy to govern how many students are in a class. And there's a lot of other things too. I grew up and was graded myself in, with a 100-point scale, and I can recall the teacher putting in these little red circles and when there was a missing comma or a period, or you forgot to cross a T or something like that, and where you lost credit for the test, even though by all rights you should have had 100 because the intent and the message was correct, but there was some discrepancies. Back in the 70s, I was working at the Long Island Railroad. I was a supervisor of training, and we had moved to a competency curriculum for the apprentice program, and it worked very well. And everybody had to be able to understand the effect of, the wedge effect on lubricating bearings and et cetera, et cetera. And as such, because we were so very thorough with the testing and with the grading, we had received accreditation from the Federal Railway Administration and from the Association of American Railroads that we were then able to interchange our product and the roller bearings, all kinds of bearings for freight cars, passenger cars, etc. And the testing was done on the competencies, not on, that's a SKF bearing, that would be right, but how the bearing works, what was involved in making it work, how it was lubricated, etc., and going into details and having each person be able to explain and show that they were proficient in the repair and a judgment of these various bearings, which gave us a rating with the FRA and with the AAR. And we got certified. Later on, when I was working in Maine as a inspector and repair on locomotives and safety, I took the occasion to take a test for the Federal Railway Administration for a certified federal safety inspector. And this was not a question and answer where you answered yes or no. They didn't correct you because you didn't cross the T, but they had a number of questions there where you had to write a report on an accident or a situation. And there was no other details given, but you had to make one up and be able to explain it in minute detail. I happened to pass the test with a 92, and I could have got 100 if I had been a veteran. So this explains why this grading system is so important. This proposal here with the amendment and everything, I cannot support it. I don't like it at all. I don't like the language in it. And I think that it's a back-end effort by individuals to manipulate what they want and not what's best. So that being said, I cannot support this. I will not support it. I will not vote a yes on any part of this thing as amended.
Okay. Now, I don't want to get into debating it because I don't, like Mr. Moser, I don't intend to support this, but I don't think this piece that's been taken out of the contract has anything to do with what we're talking about tonight. That's totally unrelated to what we're doing. That means that if a teacher decides to not pass a student, the administrator can't go and say the student needs to be passed. That's all that's about. It's not about the kind of grading system we use or anything else. So I think that that's totally irrelevant. But again, I'm not going to get into big debate because I'm not going to support any of it. Mrs. Oden, how's the studying going over there?
And I did get Susan Rook's email today, and thank you. You bring up a lot of good points. But I do have this from another teacher who I respect, and it's, let me be clear. It says, I like competencies. I believe that they very much have a role in my class and are appropriate for what we do as teachers. This hasn't always been the case. In fact, when we moved to our current method of reporting, I double booked my grades using my old method of total points grading and compared it to the new competency grading. For 95% of my students, the grades were the same, within 1 to 2 percentage points of each other. To me, this indicates that really the reporting method shouldn't matter. They also, this concerns me. Up top, she said, to begin, teachers in Nashua as a whole have simply not received enough professional development as to what what competency itself looks like or how to really assess competency as opposed to using more traditional grading methods. And they go on. Students across disciplines should have the same basic expectations from all of their teachers and what it takes to meet and exceed expectations in every class they take. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Some teachers give multiple choice tests in which 10 out of 10 answers correct are an A+. Some would count that as a B with the caveat that no possibility for expansion existed. Depending on the level of complexity of the questions and if there is any follow-up, explanations were required. Most multiple choice questions overall don't address competency. They're a study in random choices, but don't demonstrate a student's ability to apply and use information. There are teachers who would roll their eyes and insist that we don't need any more PD, but I would suggest that our students would tell a different story in terms of teacher consistency and evaluation of student work. You know, I think, and I've said it, I think we need to continue to look at the competency-based grading. I think there are problems, and this teacher explained a whole lot of X2. There's been a lot of problems with X2. Boy, I could find that paragraph. But anyway, I just think now is the wrong time to change this. I think we need to look at it. We have so much going on in this district. I just think we need to continue this year to look at it. I think we need to address some of the problems. We seem to say, oh, it's working, it's working. I think we need to be specific. What is not working and where is the professional development to educate people? I think, I've said it before, I think the Title II funds for professional development haven't been used enough for teacher professional development. I think we've used it in ways that are too far away from the classroom. And I have some concerns. It's not perfect. I think we have to work on it, but I'm not willing to change it at this point with all the changes going on. But I would like to see us get some really hard data on it and see where people are honestly and say it's not perfect. We need to work on it. So I can't change it now, but I do want to study it this year, and I want some honest appraisals of it. I don't want people to say, I love it, it's great, because it doesn't seem, and I said, I've heard from teachers I respect a whole lot that it's not working for all. So I think we need to investigate a whole lot more.
Mr. Hallwell.
Totally agree. I think it is being looked at. I mean, the notion that this isn't being reviewed is wrong. After the first year, it's the reason they went from you could recover anything to we're not going to allow you to recover, more than X amount of a grade, right? It may have been the right or the wrong decision, but you can't have it both. Not you, but the makers of the motion can't have it both ways and say there's been no review and no what was there was some quote in the document about for the NEASC we're supposed to be reviewing our grading policy. Well, it happens all the time. The board doesn't have to be involved in that day-to-day decision that's going on. There are tweaks made all the time in the school district that, lo and behold, work without the board having to have a motion to tell people to do one thing or another. Usually because we don't have enough information to know what the right move is. I guess I'm just going to go back because I was just amendment, but I have to get a few things off my chest here. Mrs. Kleiner made the comment earlier about the statement that is at the top page of the first page of this presentation, which says the superintendent says competency-based grading is mandatory. Find it. find it in the minutes somewhere. It's not there. Mark never said it. You can blame the board that the board decided to do it, but it's not that Mark duped us into thinking that it was mandated by the state, and that's why everybody voted for it. It's not why it happened. I was saying to somebody on the way in, the board's getting to be a bit like Groundhog Day. I wake up, I come in, and I vote on competencies or I vote on kindergarten. Each issue keeps coming back up every time I show up to a meeting. And this is not a productive way for a board to work. Decisions get made and you live with them. You may tweak them along the way, but trying to take the legs out of something as you're trying to implement it, you're just trying to make it fail. And eventually what we'll hear is, well, there's no sense having competencies. I know it's not in this motion, but there's no sense having competencies because we don't have competency-based grading. So we're not doing the grading that way, so therefore we shouldn't have competencies. I mean, that's where this cycle goes. It all goes back to ground zero. We do not average 4 points. We average 2.25, 2.5, 2.75 through this, actually 11 differentiations. It was a change that was made after they came to us the first time. I believe Mrs. Kleiner was on the board then. And we said, well, wait a minute, there's not enough. I think there were 6, if I recall. And we said, that's not enough. And so we made it 11. And why did we make it 11? We made it 11 because that's A plus, A minus, B plus. It's all the things we used to do. So teachers had to put in their grade book, they had to put A plus or B minus. They didn't put 87 or 86 or 85. They might have done that to make a grade. They had a test, and they had a grade that was a certain value, but in the end, when it got into the grade book, it was that differentiation of the plus, the A plus, the A, and the A minus. So I keep hearing that we're averaging 4 points. That would be a horrible thing to do, but that's not what we're doing, so it's okay. We had this meeting the other night, the curriculum meeting, where there was great fanfare that it was for everybody to come in and give their opinion. Everybody came in and gave their opinion. The vast majority of the people, from what I could tell, were in favor of keeping the competencies. I understand there's more than half of our teachers are afraid to come talk to any individual board member or to come out here in public. I question the veracity of those statistics. Not saying there aren't people that feel that there may be some retribution. I've never seen any evidence of it, and at least if I'm looking at tenured teachers, I think the strongest evidence I have is I don't believe we've had any calls for teachers to be fired because they came and talked to the board and we voted to fire them. So that didn't happen. And I think Mr. Marcoux would back me up on that, that has not happened. But at the end of the meeting, I think the most telling thing is the motion is pulled out of a folder completely written. Well, you don't have a motion all written in advance if you're listening to people and modifying your opinion and open to modifying your opinion. You've already decided what your opinion is. There's some comments about the bell curve. The bell curve is the 1960s curve. So that would be students getting more B's than A's. I thought I heard that was a good thing, that we should have a bell curve. So if we are, then we're moving in the right direction, not the wrong direction. And the reason the F spikes up is because the D was eliminated. Those kids that were getting D's, that probably weren't competent, many of them ended up in the F category. So that's it's a bump in F's, but in reality, it's not that the students at that end are being penalized any more than they already were. They had D's. So I think we kind of raised the bar there, and we did get some students that are up above that. So it's not like you add up the D's and the F's and it's a bump. So needless to say, I'm against the motion.
Okay, Mrs. Hohensee, Mr. Kaufman, and then I'd like to vote.
Okay, thank you. At the committee, there was 4 in support of competency grading and 2 against. If you wanted to tally, Mr. Hollowell, tonight there were 7 to 6. Competencies got 7. Against the competency grading was 6. You have 11 points within a 4-point scale. I'm looking at it as a 100-point scale where there's 100 differentiation points. You have a 4.0 that you've divided up in 11 different ways. I'm saying that the more categories, the more precision. What we're looking at is you've got a bell curve, whether it's current or not, that those dated from 60s to 80s to 2007. It was told to me that we're using this competency grading to fight grade inflation. But when I looked at that, we're not fighting grade inflation. We're creating something totally different. It looked more binary. You're either competent or not. And my concern is grade compression. It's more difficult, you've heard over and over, to get those A's. The C's are shrinking. Everybody's going to the B. We have our different opinions, but let's not try to ridicule each other, okay? I get that over and over again. It's like we bring this up because this issue is important to us, and I would like the respect that are, of each other for bringing up something that we think is of value. And as to Mrs. Oden's concern about time, and this might not be the right time, there's no date on this. This is just saying that it needs to be, these changes need to be happen. We need to get equity back in there for remediation. We need to do something, and if it takes us 2 semesters to do it, it takes us 1.5. There's no time factor on here. That would be worked out with the framework of what's doable. Nobody's asking anybody to stand up on their head and drop everything. It's just based on the problems, something needs to be done to tell these students that we're going to address their problems. That's all.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. I find it interesting that there's, we need data, we need data, we need more data. Well, where's the data that this original competency-based model was based on? The fact is, as I understand it, when I spoke with Ms. Susing, it was based upon, I think he was a university professor, he had a proposal, maybe he wrote a book or an article, people were interested in it, he came in, he consulted, and they developed it. They, meaning our own staff, developed it from scratch. It wasn't anything that had been implemented anywhere else. It wasn't anything that had been in another classroom. It hadn't been tested. That data that I've seen and we've asked has not been forthcoming. What did you base it on? You based it on an idea without any data supporting the change. So now I find it kind of interesting that you want data to substantiate it. Well, quite frankly, that should have been one of the first questions this board asked. I don't know if it did or not, but I'm disappointed in that. I do have a couple of other comments, and, I know, we brought this back, and I kind of, appreciate the Groundhog Day comment, because that's how important this is. If the kids don't feel, and the parents don't feel, and if the teachers don't feel the grading system is fair, we really have to deal with that. And perception becomes reality. And if kids are checking out and not putting in effort to try and get a better grade, then we all suffer, because we've really taken the love of learning out of the equation, and kids are just hanging out in E-Block. We don't know what they do there. That's another situation. But when I researched this, I found out something that really shocked me. And this applies to the committee that did the work. That no teacher, principal, administrator, or assistant superintendent that served on the implementation committee had any state-level curriculum administrator certification, and that no state-certified curriculum administrators employed by the district were included as part of the competency grading implementation committee. Now, I determined that myself by looking at the attendees, the people who received these emails, that distribution list. Of course, I took off the board members, and then comparing it to a list of the state of New Hampshire that lists the certifications that various people have. There were no matches. The district does have several, maybe a half a dozen or more people who have this certification. Our current curriculum positions are filled with non-certified staff. This is a big deal, especially in senior positions. Then that's changing with the change of the superintendents. But it was true when this curriculum was adopted. The retribution, I've had several. I figure I'm the least notified member of the board by the public. In other words, they don't know who I am and what am I doing here. So I figure I get very, very few, and I do get very, very few letters, but I do get them, and I get them requesting anonymity. And I have a real concern when we were in curriculum 2 times ago. Mrs. Zeem had asked for copies of the surveys that have been referred to many times tonight, the teacher, the parent, and the student surveys. And they were sent out again on May 16th. And I have a real concern that the data sent out on that May 16th email has different results than the data that we received on April 16th. And I can show you it's not bullshit. I saw your lips.
Okay,
Sorry.
watch the language.
Sorry. I have it on my computer. You want to see them?
Okay,
let me finish, please.
Okay, wrap it up. Let's
I'll
go.
wrap it up. The fact is, and I'd be happy to show anybody, put it up on my computer, show you the file we got in April, show you the files, 2 files actually we received on May 16th, and the data for the teachers is different in all 3 cases. And I guess I'll jump to my point about that now and not wait till later. And given what I will describe as a data fraud that I just mentioned, I would like to ask the administration to begin an investigation.
We have a
I'm
motion.
sorry.
We're dealing with a motion here, Mr. Kaufman.
Fine.
We're going to stay on the motion.
All right, let's get your vote.
Okay, if there's no objection, we're going to vote. Seeing none, roll call, please, on the amendment, motion to amend to essentially the same as the original motion, as I said before, except they've added keep competency instruction, not competency grading, move to reframe high school grading system. Everyone understands what we're voting on? An amendment, not the original motion. Roll call, please, Ms. Van Twyver.
Mrs. Oden?
No.
Mrs. Oden?
No.
Dr. Murataki?
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver votes no. Mr. Hallowell?
No.
Mr. Mosier?
No.
Mrs. Zeem?
No.
Mr. Hohenhensee?
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrington?
No. Fails 6-3. Back to the original motion. Everybody has a copy of it, knows what it is. Move to restore traditional grading system in our 2 high schools. Seeing no discussion, roll call, please.
Mrs. Oden?
No.
Dr. Murataki?
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver votes no. Mr. Hallowell?
No.
Mr. Mosier?
No.
Mrs. Zeem?
No.
Mrs. Hohensie?
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrington?
No. Motion fails 6-3. Okay, I want to say something before you vote. I know you people are tired, you want to leave, but I want to thank everyone who came out tonight and/or sent emails to us again to share your thoughts on this topic. I got to admit, I got behind on responding to them. Sorry about that. I did read them all, and I think everybody here on the board read them all. A number of things have been pointed out this evening, and the people that work on this are going to continue to work and refine it. So thank you very much for your input and your time this evening. Committee on Human Resources, Mrs. Zeem.
I would like to respond a little bit to Mr. Marcoux's remarks about the HR committee tonight. His remarks caused me to consider that maybe I didn't do a very good job of explaining why the HR committee decided to veer from our normal pattern in these circumstances. I don't know that I will do it justice, but I'm going to try to give a better explanation. To start off with, Dr. Mosley is currently still under contract to the Sharon Mass School District. Knowing he would ultimately be the supervisor of all district employees, new and tenured, it was HR's desire that he be included in the higher level hiring process. He has attended almost all of the director management interviews, personally overseeing the process in intimate detail. Recognizing the value of good leadership, he spent many, many hours in that process, commuting back and forth using his own vacation days and gas to do so. With the hiring of the assistant superintendents, he personally called every board member to assure there was no discord in the process. That may sound like a small thing unless you consider how much hot air some of us have. And I would be the worst offender, so I'm not picking on anyone in particular. In the hiring of the principal at Bicentennial, my memory serves me that we had over 25 applicants. We also had a meet and greet. We've been trying to have meet and greets for all of these candidates when possible. Unfortunately, now we are getting down to, I think there's something like 10 days left before school is out. And the unfortunate part about not having all these positions filled is that you do like to have a little bit of time planning for next year. In this case, if they're not hired, Dr. Mosley will start in July. If they're not even hired, it just doesn't leave much time to get in all of the things that you need to get in. I think of comments that, and obviously when you go from one leadership style to another leadership, or when you change personnel, there's a lot of catching up that you have to do, and it's been quite complex. We actually had, I was trying to write down exactly how many leadership positions we've been interviewing for, and I came up with 9. So if you tell yourself that one of them was 25, I mean, each one could be 5 meetings, and so it's cumbersome. So Dr. Mosley wanted to personally call, with the assistant superintendents, he wanted to personally call the references before he made a commitment. Because he, again, recognizing that leadership is everything, he wanted to be sure that we were getting the best people that we could possibly get. I mean, there's nothing foolproof, but he was doing, I believe he was conscientiously trying to do his very best to get the best people possible. And so just calling the references, I believe we ended up those interviews last week, and then he started making those calls, and of course he was making the calls to all the board members as well, plus he was doing his full-time job in Sharon Mass, communicating back and forth here. I would suggest to you it has not been easy for any of us in this process. So in the case of Elm Street, I would like to say that we were very concerned that we might lose Mr. Atwell. And over the years, Elm Street has been a challenging school. It is our largest middle school. It is middle school. Middle school in and of itself can be challenging. With my kids, I can tell you that was the most challenging years I remember. And so looking back on the history of Elm Street, before Mr. Fredrickson came, the school was struggling. Under Mr. Fredrickson's leadership, I have to say we saw great improvements. And Mr. Atwell came with Mr. Fredrickson, and together they performed a miracle, in my view. It's not where we'd like to see it yet, but it's going up. It's not going down. And for that, I thank Mr. Fredrickson and I thank Mr. Atwell. Some of you will remember when Mr. Atwell was appointed, I was one of the ones who was concerned about the money. But having said that, there can be no denial that those 2 men did a great job for us at that school. And it is our students who enjoy the benefits of their hard work. So I'm wondering, because this whole process has been it's been overwhelming. So with Mr. Atwell, we did not want to lose him because, and I will say that we have noticed a difference in the applicants for different schools. When you have a school, Bicentennial, for instance, had, I just said, at least 25, but some of our schools have not had that many applicants. And so getting the right, and the timing has been, I mean, your window, we spent most of our time at the onset finding the right superintendent. So, and that is not, I am not casting any, I think Dr. Brown did a wonderful job for us, and I appreciate her efforts as well. So I just want to say that this process has been difficult, and in the end, you may disagree with HR's decision, but we decided that in the interest of time, we would bring forth the motions to go as quickly as we could. Having said that, we can still continue with our meet and greets, and we can put resumes. I was thinking we could put the resumes, certainly put the resumes on the website. Having said that, the first recommended motion, well, the first motion I have to make is to suspend the rules so we can vote on the nominations coming from HR tonight, which were not on the
Second.
agenda.
Second.
Motion is to suspend the rules for the introduction of a report from a meeting held earlier this evening, seconded by Mr. Hollowell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, motion passes. Mrs. Ziem.
The next nomination is the, HR recommends the appointment of Garth McKinney as Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction for the 2017-18 school year at an annual salary of $111,550.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Is there any discussion?
I just wanted to say for the public, he is currently at Main Dunstable Road. He's a wonderful man. I'm if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Mrs. Hohensee.
Thank you. I'm delighted to support him. I know he does have the curriculum administrator certification, and will be a big help in our district. I'm disappointed that we couldn't have the two candidates here tonight, just in terms of transparency and showing them to the public. I think we have some great candidates here, and I know we're suspending the rules and we're pushing them through, and there isn't a crisis in terms of getting it through quickly, but I just, there's 3 members of our board that have not even met either candidate during this process, and I just think that it's not as professional as we could be, and I'm a little bit disappointed in that. Not the candidates, just the way the board is handling it.
Okay, the motion is to approve the hiring of Garth McKinney, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction for this 2017-18 school year, annual salary of $111,550. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion passes. Mrs. Ziem.
The second motion coming from HR is the nomination of Donna Fitzpatrick as the Assistant Superintendent of Accountability and Assessments for the 2017-18 school year at an annual salary of $113,550.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Is there any discussion?
I just wanted to at least share with the public her education. She was very well qualified and very well spoken. I'm sorry that you haven't all met, but again, we can still have an open a meet and greet with her. In 2014, she got an advanced graduate degree as an education specialist at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. In 97, she got a master's degree in counseling psychology from Lesley University at Cambridge, Mass. And in 82, she got a Bachelor of Science in Education from Springfield College in Springfield, Mass. And so, again, I'll ask that the resumes be put online for everybody to see.
Mrs. Hohensee.
Thank you. Again, this is a great candidate. I'm very enthusiastic that she's joining our district. I'm just disappointed that we couldn't have her here tonight. So our board members that haven't met her could meet her before they decide that she's for our district. I think she's great. I think she's promised that she's going to move to Nashua or the surrounding area. So she's committed to our district, and that's very good.
Motion is approved. Donna Fitzpatrick, Assistant Superintendent of Accountability and Assessment for the 2017-18 school year, salary $113,550. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion passes. Mrs. Ziem.
The next recommendation is for Ian Atwell to be principal at Elm Street Middle School for the 2017-18 school year at an annual salary of $96,750.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving Ian Atwell at $96,750, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Mrs. Zine.
And finally, we have the nomination of Kelly Holmes, the assistant principal at Elm Street Middle School for the 2017-18 school year at an annual salary of $84,250. She did plan on attending tonight, but was unable to make it because of a personal medical crisis.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving Kelly Holmes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
And then we have two other motions. We have the personnel, I don't have that. It was a 2.5% increase for the non-affiliated staff. It was like for a cost of $32,690 approximately. And that's it.
Is there a second on that, Mrs. Oden? Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Mr. Hollowell.
I just want to clarify, does that have all the existing non-affiliated, or does that exclude the ones that are now unionizing?
Well,
Dr. Brown.
That includes the current non-affiliated and excludes the members of the new unit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Motion is to, how's that end up there? Motion to approve the non-affiliated salary increase. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
And finally, there was a personnel recommendation list. I've got the wrong paper, but it's the revised, let's see, yes, this is the revised edition, if you will, of June 12, 2017.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. That concludes your report, Mrs. Zine?
Thank you.
Excellent. Liaison reports? Seeing none, unfinished business? Seeing none, new business? We got grade 11 SAT results on the summary. Dr. Brown, did you want to speak to that at all?
I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Frederickson.
Some good news this year with the SAT results. I think if you...
Excellent.
If you're taking a look at it, and both Keith and Mary Ann and their staff worked really hard this year to address the low scores last year, and I think there's, as Keith put it, there's a lot of room for improvement, but to see these kind of jumps in scores is pretty amazing. As a district, the amount of kids that met the requirements for be ready for college work in both reading and math jumped up by 8%. I think which is pretty impressive. If you look at the state, they only jumped up by 2%. Something really impressive is if you look at the meeting both benchmarks was over at South at 37% of the kids versus 27% last year. Heck of a job on their part. These are real scores. These being some real opportunities for kids when you talk about increasing SAT scores in terms of admittance to college, improvements on scholarships and stuff. So I'm really impressed. I do know there's a lot more room to improve on. If you look as a district, up by 38 points. By 32 points overall on the overall score. The state only went up by 9 points. So really impressive. I think, last year, I know this was a point of angst. I see some great things in the future. It's great to see the high school making those kind of strides on those kind of scores. So I thank both Mary Ann and Keith and their staff. Great job.
Excellent. Thank you. And then Mr. Kaufman had a request here on follow-up from the administration on Mr. Hollowell's request from the administration. Mr. Boucher.
Thank you. Since the original request was made, we've taken a couple of different steps to try to gather the information that's been requested. We began by adding a question to the district's registration packet so that when people sign up their children in the district, we can capture information regarding internet access. We're also in the process of adding a similar question to the student information update form, better known as the green sheet, which goes out to all, with all students at the start of the school year. The green sheet, the update form is actually a form that comes out of Aspen. So the attractive part of that is that once we capture that information, that data, we can store that in Aspen and have that, that way of studying it as well. Thought long and hard about surveying the families, and at this point in the school year, I don't believe that trying to gather information from 5,000 or 6,000 families in the district is doable, nor would it yield the return or the response that I think we might be looking for. As an alternative, what I'm suggesting is that you consider doing a brief survey when the students return in the fall of middle and high school students, that you administer that survey at school to capture the maximum participation. And I'm pretty confident the results of that survey will give you a good snapshot of what internet access looks like across the district. Also, I'd like to make another more general recommendation. This district is badly in need of an updated technology plan. Most districts do that in five-year plans. An updated plan would be invaluable to this board, because once you have an updated plan in hand, then every debate, discussion, decision that you need to make regarding technology will be tied to that plan. I think it would make things go a lot more smoothly for you. So I would urge you that you make the creation or the update of a tech plan a high priority for the incoming administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kaufman, you have any?
Thank you. I do recall, thank you for the information and your recommendations. I do recall Mr. Hollowell's request had something to do by the end of the year. So, and I'm just sad that we had to ask for the update, and it wasn't proactive, which is, I think, what the original intent of that motion was. I would request from the administration that the board, or at least myself, get a copy of some kind of report that deals with job titles, what certifications are required by that position by the state, and then if the current employee holds that certification. I want to ensure that the people we have in place have the certifications that they're supposed to have for the jobs that they hold with the district. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hallwell.
I think Ms. O'Gara would point out that they couldn't be employed by the district if they didn't have the requirements the state requires.
Okay, so if I may?
Sure.
I could share with you something that I've recently heard in non-public that would refute that. Yeah. If you care to go into non-public.
Okay, no, we're not going into non-public tonight.
Thank you.
We'll do public comments. You got something else?
Yeah, so I just want to, my fault. Mr. Boucher had sent me an email, and in all the emails that I get, so many board emails, I thought the BOE was CC'd on the email. It wasn't. It was to me since I had made the request. So my fault. That happened actually, I think, a couple weeks ago. So apologize to Mr. Boucher for not letting the board know that that had happened.
Thank you.
Okay. New business?
Mr. President.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. This actually touches on Mr. Kaufman's comment. In fact, the new education regulations that relate to the requirements for certain...
Could you hit your microphone a little better?
Oh, right. So I believe it's the new ED 306, but they use new terminology for the naming of educator positions. And the new names for educator positions do carry a list of requirements by the state, but the potential issue is that the names that we use in this district do not necessarily match the names of the educator positions used in the New Hampshire education regulations. So that's been a minor issue for a few years now, I think at least 2. And it may be something that we should be addressing, is to maybe align, at least have a lookup table that says these district positions correlate to these educator titles in the New Hampshire education regulations, and then you get a pretty crisp definition of exactly what those requirements are. But until that time, where we line up the district's titles for job positions versus the ED, 3XX series, we may continue to have problems. Thank you.
Mrs. Hohensee.
Thank you. I've got a comment and new business. On this last one, if you go to the DOE website, there's a place where you can put in educators and you can find the current certification. And Mr. Kaufman is right. We have 3 district-wide curriculum supervisors with no curriculum administration certification. And we did have a previous assistant superintendent without superintendent certification. So I'm not going into names, not doing that, but the need for that report is valid. And if I may, I would like to ask the board to consider giving mileage to Dr. Mosley for his hard work coming back and forth. Forget his time, just mileage. I think we might be able to fit that in our budget this year, just out of respect for all the time and effort he has put in. So I would move that the board consider doing something like that.
I would suggest we put that on the agenda for next meeting. I think this is not the time where you're catching people at a bad time. We'll put that on the agenda for the next meeting. Public comments? Anybody? Paul? Mrs. Johnson? Wherever, yeah. Can you?
Sorry. Share space with you, Doris. You know? That's okay. I've got tons of papers here. Paula Johnson again from Nashua. Very interesting meeting here. This is why I don't want to run again. Although I don't mind the attacks, I had my fill of it when I was on both boards. Doesn't bother me. You get tough-skinned after a while. A couple of things I'd like to discuss here. I've got all these papers here. Superintendent Brown, did you get my voice message on Friday that I left for you?
I did.
Go ahead.
Yes?
I said I did.
Okay. I didn't get an email and any of my questions answered.
You asked quite a few questions at the public hearing, as well as those that you asked in your email. And so we collected the information for you, and it was mailed to your home.
Oh, it was mailed to my home. That doesn't do me any good because I'm here tonight. I had asked if you could please email it to me. So I guess I'll ask the question
Well, this
here.
is public comment, Mrs. Johnson.
I understand that, Mr. Farrington.
Well,
But I
I'm just
didn't get any
just-
answers to my questions, and if I would have had it tonight, I could have discussed it. So I will kind of put it out here again. People like to answer it. I asked it at the public hearing, and maybe I didn't ask my word question right. If you have 10 teachers that are being moved over to kindergarten, what exact schools are they coming from? What classes in those schools and grades are you going to equalize? And what grades are these teachers coming from to move to full-day kindergarten? That's the question I asked that night. And somehow nobody understood my question. I don't know. I'm taking classes at school. I do have a hard time, I know, with math. I'm not a mathematical genius here. But I'm not dumb when it comes to questions and answers, and we all know that. So I just wanted to know, and then I wanted to know why, if the enrollment is dropping, is the cost of education going up? So a dear friend of mine that I have to say really highlighted my day as I was running out to go to school today, and she says, and the article was in the Concord Monitor, how taxes rise while enrollment drops in New Hampshire school districts like Merrimack Valley. So I guess Nashua's in Hillsborough County. I guess somehow this probably intertwines with Nashua too. I don't understand, and I've sat on the boards, and I know budgets. I also was self-employed, and I know budgets. Logic, but I guess there's no logic in government. But logic says when your enrollment comes down, your needs for that many teachers would go away unless we filter them into all-day kindergarten, which studies show isn't the best. And I'm glad my kids are grown up and not in the school system anymore. Total enrollment in Merrimack Valley, the second largest school district in the area, has
fallen a little more than 10% over a 10-year period, declining from 2,873 students in 2006 to 2,575 in 2015. Meanwhile, over the period, spending has gone up 25% from $29.3 million to $36.5 million. So these things in the district, we all have, I guess, the same type of flow. Enrollment is down, costs are rising. Retirement contributions. The district spent a little over $2.5 million over them in 2015-16 year to 2016 school year. If the state was still pitching at 35% they did before 2010, the district bill would have been $660,000 less by the calculations. So when I hear tonight about salaries, I almost fell over with the salaries. We got new people coming in, assistant superintendent of curriculum for $111,000. Is that the higher end of the scale or the lower end of the scale? Assistant superintendent of curriculum, accountability and assessment, $113,000 at the high end or the low end. Principal, Elm Street, $96,750. Assistant principal, $84,250. When Social Security doesn't get a raise, how do you justify this? And I said that the same at the public hearing, and I say at the Board of Aldermen. How do you justify this to people who can barely keep their homes where the economy has been stagnant for 8 years? How do you justify these salaries, plus pensions that are so outrageous? Then I want to go on to this thing about the great Ledge Street misdirect. Sometimes the Telegraph really comes up with good editorials. And I guess what bothers me is that, and the president of the teachers union is here, first the teachers retired, and the principals, excuse me. I get it.
Okay, right over here, please.
First, one of them retires after 28 years, and she moved to pursue other opportunities. And then the other one, one pursued other opportunities, one retired. Now we find out that they're being paid. According to public records, the Telegraph on May 25th, one of them is getting paid $3,942.30, and the other one's being paid $2,971.20 with taxpayers' money. I don't know what happened. Nobody knew what happened here. But the mere fact that first the public is being told, and we get the story that they were removed from the school, that they retired, they went on to pursue other careers, and now all of a sudden they're back on the payroll of taxpayers' dollars. Only in government does this happen. Taxpayers' dollars. I'm tired of this. I really am. And I listen to everybody on the board, and if you don't like what somebody says, you're arrogant and you're rude. How dare you lose the respect for a board member? They are all elected like you are, Mr. Holloway, like you are, Mr. Farrington. They're elected. The people put them in here for checks and balances because they like their ideas. And to be arrogant, I'm sorry. Maybe you don't need to run, and maybe you don't need to be here, because again, my tax dollars are paying for your stipends. And it's a disgrace. It really is. And you know what I don't like, and I said it to the Board of Aldermen, I'm going to just end it like this. When you take money from the unions, you need to disclose it, and maybe you shouldn't vote on anything, because as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, you're bought and paid for by the union. Thank you.
Anyone else? Public comment? I knew we'd get to you.
Patiently waiting.
Yes.
I hope it's okay if I talk about something completely different.
I know what it is, but go ahead.
So for those of you who were at the budget meeting, so.
Can we have your name, please?
Thank you. Mike Gallagher, 9 Old Coach Road. So My daughters do brownies at Maine Dunstable School, and part of their project one evening was to help pick up trash around the school building. And for the last 20 minutes of their session, they went out and they played on the playground at Maine Dunstable School. We live, 2 miles down the road, get them to bed, call it a night. I happened to be at the school that same evening at Mayor Donchis's Ward 5 meeting. When I came home, my wife had said, oh, well, we got a text message from a couple of the other parents saying that they had found several ticks on their children. So she woke our children up, checked them, gave them showers, and put them back to bed. Following morning, my youngest daughter had a tick embedded in her neck and needed to be taken to the doctors to have it removed. And it was a deer tick, and as we all know, and if you watch the news, you know that this is a bad tick season and so on and so forth. And so my wife was concerned, and she wanted to raise the question, and she asked, to whom should I call? And my suggestion to her was to call the SAU. Our kids go to New Searles, so I don't know who the principal is at Maine Dunstable, and thought that that might be the most reasonable place to start. And let's just say her experience was less than pleasant. And so we all, in some way, shape, or form, if we work for the city, doesn't matter what you do, we're all in some capacity of public service. And if a concerned parent is calling in regard to what I consider to be a public safety issue, the response that she received from the receptionist was, that's not our problem, you need to call the school. Not oh, that's so horrible to hear, I'm so sorry, let me give you the phone number to Maine Dunstable so that we can make that phone call. It's just simply, it's not our problem. Now, the parent who had sent the original message that she found them, their children do go to Maine Dunstable, and they had already reached out to the administration there, and the issue was done, and a letter had gone home that day to parents to notify them. But I find it concerning in that for the entire spring season, these kids have been out for recess in that same playground, and whether or not there had been something found or not, hopefully not. In speaking with other parents in that school, the issue had been raised about the length of the grass, and I don't know logistically if that's a Parks and Rec situation or how that kind of gets done. At the conclusion of the meeting, the budget meeting, Alderman Lopez and Alderman Cookson had shared with me that through the City of Nashua, we have a tremendous amount of grant money available through public health to deal with ticks. And so what I'm hopeful is that this conversation can at least start that collaboration between the SAU, the administration, and public health. Because if those monies are available and part of that is requirement of education, kind of seems silly that they're not already speaking to you, but that if maybe there's an outreach that can be made to them to facilitate that going forward. And I would also encourage that to include training for staff for, Lyme's disease children, people who have it, whose, staff may not understand what it's like and how to help, how to appropriately treat a student that has Lyme disease. And again, this isn't a, fibromyalgia where I have it and I can't show you something that says I have it. This is, I can give you a doctor's note that says I've been diagnosed with this disease, because I think that there's an opportunity in district to work on that.
Well, first, let me say, just beat Dr. Brown to it. I apologize for the way was it your wife that called?
Yeah.
I apologize for the way she was spoken. We expect better service than that. I just saw Mr. Donovan making a note over there. It's his folks that work for him that do the grounds and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's something that we can look into as far as if there are funds available and we can coordinate something. I mean, I have small grandchildren. We worry about the same thing all the time, so I understand. So thank you for coming in.
Yep. Thank you for your time.
You bet.
Good evening.
Okay. Yes?
Mr. Farrington, while we're waiting.
I'm sorry.
So for the.
There's no arguing, gentlemen. We'll get you both in.
Finance meeting, let's add that to the agenda if you find out anything.
Yeah, I have some information on it now. I'll try to get a little more tomorrow.
Go ahead.
Adam Marcoux, 4 Jalori Lane, President of the Nashua Teachers Union. I have so many thoughts, so many things going through my head. Where to start? The one thing that has bothered me in the last month or so is there have been accusations thrown against the Nashua Teachers Union that have yet to be substantiated by the person making those accusations. Ms. Hohensee, in an article to the Telegraph, in public comment, has accused the Nashua Teachers Union of sweeping issues under the rug, that teachers fear retribution, and when I ask for evidence of said things, there's nothing that she can provide to me. So unless you have evidence that the Nashua Teachers Union is sweeping issues under the rug, or these cases of repeated retribution, please stop making those accusations. I agree that if there were cases, as Mr. Hollowell said, I would be the first one here to run them up the flagpole. And I'm here to tell you that I have ears in the 17 schools, and those issues have not been raised to me, to my officers, to my 3 grievance chairs, or my 70 building reps. My next point goes to Mr. Kaufman. I'm appalled. I'm embarrassed. I'm a taxpayer. I work for the city. You owe Sarah Mirandos an apology, and you owe the public an apology, this board, every person in this city, for your actions at this board meeting. It was beyond unprofessional to act the way you acted. This isn't the first time either. They recur in my head the time you had teachers in tears, the way you attacked them last year, the way you attacked Mrs. Ziem last August on the phone.
Okay, Adam, can we just...
So, non-public because it was public. He's a board member, he's not covered under the RSAs.
No, I
You
understand.
can sigh at me all you want, but you guys continue to do these things, make accusations, attack people, and there's no consequences. If a teacher acted like that, there'd be consequences. If an administrator spoke to someone like that in public, there'd be consequences. This is absurd. My final piece, I will not be at the next June, the final June board meeting. I'll be on vacation. So this is my opportunity to thank Mr. Boucher, Mr. Fredrickson, and Dr. Brown. I've enjoyed working with the 3 of them immensely since they came on board in July. I feel that the relationship between the union and central office has been positive. We haven't agreed on everything, but we found creative ways to work together and agree to disagree in a way that left us willing to come back to the table to discuss the issues in a positive way that will benefit the school district and, most importantly, our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Mr. Sitar.
I thought it was on. Okay, much better. Earlier in the public comments, there was some discussion about the technology issues we had with the rollout of competencies and X2. And maybe I misinterpreted, but it sounded like it was sort of a dig at our technology group. I can honestly say that in the time that I've been on the implementation committee, Ms. Mirandos has done a phenomenal job. I've seen her address the issues brought up at the implementation committee, address the issues, the concerns of the teachers, work with Aspen to get those things implemented, understanding that her first responsibility is to keep the system stable and make sure that it doesn't go down, it doesn't break for the students that are in their current year. So as a member of that committee, I just wanted to publicly set the record straight and say thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Mr. Farrington.
We're not going, it's not a debate. Any other public comments? Board member comments. We're coming around to board member comments, Mr. Kaufman. We'll start over here. Mrs. Hohensee.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Marcoux for giving me something to talk about. I received multiple anonymous reports I gave you an email detailing this. They were consistent. They talked about the vote of no confidence. They gave me the 42-11 score. They told me about the backpack letters with that score. That's how the parents knew about the score. I told you could go on Facebook. I saw it out there, multiple locations. I'm not going to give up the name of a parent. I'm just not going to do that. So I just mentioned that it's out there. I could prove that it's out there, but I'm not going to give up a parent as well as I'm going to give up a teacher.
The point here is not to debate with somebody in the audience, please.
The other thing is, as to him attacking a board member, I have been heckled and interrupted by the union president innumerable times with no apologies. The grading reports, I did put in a call, or did put an email into Mrs. Miranda's, and she did call me back with Mr. Richards there. They were inconsistent, and I'd be happy to show anybody with the data from last year. They tell me that they're consistent, that there was no change. I'm still confused as to why we would get reports that were without the same data. There was up to 23 teachers polled. It's an anonymous report, and it favored the score instead of 54 to 46% against the competency. Now it was like 49 to 51. So I just pulled it, and the same with the parents. The reports, there was final reports and then these new reports in between, but the data didn't match up to last year. So I tried, I reached out, I made an effort. I didn't mention it in my discussion today till it was brought up by someone else, but it made no sense to me that they were different from last year. That's all.
Mr. Mosier?
Well, I think I said pretty much what I had to say before, but I have taken issue with the fact that there seems to be so many of these so-called anonymous reports that come in. And I discount a lot of things that are labeled anonymous because if somebody's afraid to have their name mentioned in public because they had a comment, tough luck. Bye.
Mrs. Oden?
Thank you. I was the one who read something from a teacher, and it said something about X2. It was not anything to do with Sarah Miranda. She has worked exceedingly hard. She has done more work with X2 than probably anybody that works with them. I know they gave her special treatment at one point when we were trying to adjust the competencies. I think it's the frustration with the X2 itself. It had nothing to do with Sarah Mirandis, and Sarah, I thank you for all your work you've done with that. I wish Adam Lambert was still here. It was good to see him again. I give him credit for the integrity to come and say what he said. I'm sure it was a little difficult. But what was interesting, within 2 or 3 weeks, the past 2 or 3 weeks, I did hear that some students that had gone to Nashua, one of our high schools, and I'm not going to name which one, came back and was talking about their experience in college, and they made some of the same comments, what I understand, and I don't know how many there were, but they made some of the same comments that Adam made tonight about competency. So I do want to say that. Also, I was able to attend swing night on the Saturday night that the Nashua High South Jazz Band hosted that. What Tony Coronas does and what those students do is just amazing. And I would guess, when you look at public schools, and I don't want to talk about performing arts schools, but I would put them up against anybody in the country. They are just phenomenal. So kudos to the music program within our schools, but that in particular was just, they're beyond anything you would think high school kids could perform.
Thank you. Mrs. Ziem? Going to pass? Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. Yes, I agree. My outburst was unwarranted, and I certainly do apologize for my outburst. However, I do have evidence that I would like to present to the board now, since my integrity has been challenged. May I please
No, we're not
display
going to
that?
go there. We're going to make
So,
comments,
let
and
me
we're going
finish
home. We're
then.
going to make comments
I'm
and go
not
home.
done. So let me be clear. I will be sending to the board, probably by the time when I get home tonight, you will receive 3 files. The file that came out last April, these are the teacher surveys. The file that came out last April, and the 2 files that were sent out this immediate past May 16th, I believe it was. And you will notice that for the one question that I looked at, which is question number 2, the data is different on all 3 reports. I stand by my comment. The apology, my outburst deserves an apology. The presentation of data to the board that changes over time is not acceptable. And I will not, as a board member, accept being lied to, deceived, or otherwise handed mis- or disinformation and have information delayed like it's happened to me over the last year and a half. So this outburst, and now my passion and outburst, and keep yourself cool, is because of this behavior I've experienced over the last year and a half, and the fact that this data has changed very clearly. I shared it with Dr. Brown. She saw it here. Anybody interested? Here's the laptop. We can look at it before we go home. The other thing, and I want to address this, there's no place in this district for the fear of retribution by anyone. Teachers, parents, students, and board members should all feel empowered to express their opinion without fear of reprisal. Now, here's the thing. The climate survey that came out last June had a question. I don't remember what number it was. Somehow the number 52 sticks in my head. It might have been on page 52. And the question in the survey, which the union prepared, the board had no input into that. There's a question in there about retribution or reprisal. It's an R word. I forget exactly which word it is. But over 50% of our teachers said they feared reprisal. So it's not a fictitious coming out of thin air thing. It's documented in the climate survey if you want to go look it up. And I'll send that out to the board tomorrow. I'll dig it up. Thank you.
Mr. Howell?
No, pretty much speechless.
I should be, but I'm not. Dr. Murataki?
Yes, thank you. For those of you that are out in television land, I just thought I would mention that there are, I believe it's 4 seats on the board up for election this year. And you are already able to go to City Hall, to the city clerk, and pick up the petitions. These board positions are all 9 wards, therefore you need 50 petitions that are verified. So if you want to run for one of the 4 seats on the board, you should start early. Thank you very much.
Ms. Van Twyver?
No comment.
Wow, comes right around to me. All right, first, Ms. Mirandos. Your name's come up a few times tonight. Ms. Mirandos is going to be leaving us. She's gone off. She's found herself a new place to go. I hope for you it's not anywhere near as chaotic as this. I want to thank you for everything you've done for the district. Technologically, for the technology in the classrooms, I know that we would have been lost without you, and we will be lost, I think, with you being gone for at least a period of time. I hope you leave us your phone number, because I have an idea we're going to be needing to call you. But good luck in your new job. Now, the following phrase appears 9 times in our policy manual in describing the charge of 4 of our committees, and that is, the committee will work closely with the superintendent and his or her designees. HR committee phrase is a little different. It says the committee shall in coordination with the superintendent. Either way, it seems clear that when it comes to the work of our committees, our policies envision a partnership between the board and the superintendent. Revisiting competency-based grading tonight was initiated by 2 members of the curriculum committee. They justified it in large part by the results of a 15-month-old survey and a student letter to the editor. The survey is marginally relevant at best at this point because of its age and the fact that many of the concerns expressed have been already addressed. The letter pointed out what some students considered to be problems with the system. The students spoke about a need for improvement. The teachers are not consistent in their application of the grading. They're disappointed with the reduction in grade inflation. And they also think it's a little harder to get into top-tier schools. Now, as I've stated before, I believe, and I think the administration agrees, that we need to continue to work with our teachers and refine the system. My only comment on top-tier schools is that those schools take students, and the point's been made earlier, they take students from all over the world, and those students don't come from a single uniform grading system, making us the only outliers. If you recall, at our last meeting, I expressed my concern about the majority of the curriculum committee deciding to review the Common Core standards for kindergarten. When one of the board members characterizes the kindergarten standards as child abuse, there can be no claim of objectivity in going forward with this proposal. The board has no credibility. And we periodically hear the story of the challenges associated with transitioning to a new curriculum, new grading systems, etc., and sometimes referred to as the perfect storm, and how our teachers just want a break from all of the changes. I agree those were stressful times. I just don't understand, if we're now just recovering from that, why the board would want to reverse course and start the whole process over by reviewing all the curriculum. But it is on the curriculum committee's long-term agenda. With the competency grading issue, we found the same members inviting people to share their views on the subject. With 2 exceptions, the feedback indicated we should stay the course and continue to refine the system. The members then pulled out the motion to reverse direction that appeared to have been written before any public comment was made and passed it without hesitation. And here we are tonight. When we tell people, whether they're students, parents, teachers, or administrators, we want to know what they think and then do what we want to do anyway, it reflects very poorly on this board. We saw the email this afternoon telling us just that, quote, I feel as though from a teacher, I feel as though my time has been wasted and disrespected. There seems to be an opinion on this board that if we don't have our hands in it, nothing can happen to improve education in this district. I happen to believe that there are teachers, administrators, and others meeting regularly to discuss ways to refine and improve our offerings. I believe there are teachers working nightly to refine their lesson plans to better serve their students. Now, I understand that for some on the board, there's a political element to the issues of competency-based grading and Common Core standards. One of our members acknowledged such during the discussion of next generation science standards. I certainly realize that if a board member from a district of this size was able to turn back competency-based grading and begin to break apart the Common Core standards, they would be welcomed with open arms, offered a seat at the head table, and perhaps even be asked to speak at the Cornerstone picnic this summer. At the same time, I see it as a violation of our policy concerning board member ethics, which states in part that we should refrain from using our board position for personal or partisan gain. Again, I ask that the politics be left in Concord. Going forward, I encourage our committee chairs to limit their agendas to finishing up any items that have come to them through a coordination with the superintendent or her designees. Beyond that, I suggest any other initiatives be placed on hold until we have completed our administrative transition, and those folks can play a part in establishing the agenda. We're going to pay nearly $400,000 next year to our top 3 education professionals. We're going to expect them to be the educational leaders of the district and hold them responsible for improving education in Nashua. It is only right that they participate in setting the agenda. Thank you for bearing with me. The next meeting is Monday, June 26th.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mrs. Hohensee, seconded by, over here, Mr. Hollowell. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned at 10:04. 18. Boy, did you miss that.